Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the move of what if Deku was the catalyst for Shinsou and Kaminari's happiness? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanf. Denki Kaminari was always buzzing with energy. His hands couldn't sit still, always rapping and tapping on desks, knees, pencils, and chairs. His legs bounced, his feet restlessly tapped out a beat on the floor nobody but he could find rhythm in. His thoughts buzzed too. Focusing on one thing led to a small connection to another thing which led to an even farther thing, and soon enough he realized his attention hadn't been where it should have for a very long time. It wasn't that he was dumb, he could learn and understand the concepts taught to him, especially when they were interesting. It was more that he couldn't physically handle the quiet, stale silence that followed stillness. Not moving felt like not breathing to Denki. Movement surrounded Denki since he was a child, even before his quirk showed up. He would run around his house, accidentally tripping and falling and ramming his face into table corners and railings. His mom called him her little ball of energy, and his older sisters took turns letting the boy climb on them as if they were his own personal playground. That was why he never initially noticed the bruises that didn't belong to him appearing on his body. His mother had to point them out to him when he was around 4, going on 5. He had just got out of the bath, wrapped his hair and body in towels, and decided to run around the house like a demon while his sisters screamed at him to stop and covered their eyes. His mom watched with amusement. Did she have a demon for a child? Highly likely. Did she love him any less? Absolutely not. It was when Denki ran around the corner that she got a glimpse of the nasty red hand print on the back of his shoulder. It was as if someone had slapped him hard. Amusement turned to concern very quickly. Denki, see me a second? She called to him in a light, but serious tone. She heard her daughter's victorious declares and mockery of Denki's antics from some other room of the house. A mopey Denki slowly trudged his way to her, but as soon as he saw her soft smile, he straightened up and practically skipped to her, keeping a tight hold to his towel. Isn't that quite the look you've got there? Yeah, it is. Finally, somebody can appreciate real fashion in this household. His mother chuckled lightly and shook her head. Where did he get that from? Then, she knelt down to get eye level with him, and asked in a non-intimidating, curious voice. What happened to your back, Denki? She had a couple guessed as to what it could be from. She just needed to rule some out and get down to the root cause. Then she could make a plan to help fix it. Huh. He tilted his head and squinted his eyes at her. Then, they widened in realization and fear. What's wrong with my back? He tried to turn his head around to look at the red mark, but it was on his other shoulder. His mom pointed to the handprint there, red but steadily fading. Right here. Did somebody hit you? Guess one, his daycare teacher, Mr. Jichi. The man seemed kind enough, but as Ms. Kaminari knew, perceived kindness could lie, and could hide much more dangerous intentions. If he thought using corporal punishment on a 4-year-old was acceptable behavior, she would have him fired before he could plead not guilty. What? No. Denki said in earnest, waving his hands around to really emphasize the point. I would remember if somebody did. Guess two, it was a possible quirk manifestation from his or someone else's quirk. It hadn't happened yet, but she feared the day Denki Kaminari got his quirk. There would be no stopping that kid from destroying their house or their city block if his quirk were powerful enough. But I believe you. She paused, wondering if this could be used as a teaching moment for her son. And what do you do if somebody ever hits you? I get mad. Ms. Kaminari raised an eyebrow at him. And I tell you, exactly right. Good job, Denks. She ruffled his hair. Listen carefully. Remember that no matter who it is, if you need to defend yourself, you have my permission to hit back. But never ever punch first, or if you're not in danger, okay? Okay, mama. I'ma go put on my hero PJs now. Okay, baby. She watched as he ran, tearing his way to his room. She wondered if he'd have a running quirk, considering how that seemed to be his only mode of transportation. Guess 3. Denki had a soul bond shared by markings on skin. This meant he'd be able to write to them and have close communication later on, but it also meant Denki would see and share any bruises or scars with his soulmate. Guess 3 made Ms. Kaminari unnerved. It insinuated that whoever was on the other end of the link had been hurt, and maybe had been for a long time. Hitoshi Shinsou lived in fear. Hitoshi was afraid when he was living in group homes. The bigger kids were so sinister and so irate, and Hitoshi didn't know what he was supposed to do, so he stayed small and stayed quiet, and hoped to disappear completely. He was afraid when he went out to fosters. Every new family that held him was different, and he never knew what to expect besides rough hands and an eventual removal from the house. He was scared in the social worker's car and in the office buildings with too many noises and towering cubicle walls that made the employees' faces impossible to see, and made Hitoshi feel so very small. It got to the point where living without constant paranoia felt uncomfortable, like something was wrong or was inevitably going to go wrong. Hitoshi felt this unease when he was placed in a foster family's home that seemed to actually like him. Their hands and words were gentle, always asking his opinion and permission, and Hitoshi didn't know what to do with that. Like it always did, it went wrong. He had been with this family for almost a year, grown content and comfortable with them. He trusted them. He was happy. After his quirk manifested, however, they didn't trust him anymore. He didn't know how to control it, and he made mistakes. It may have been accidental, but Hitoshi hated seeing them in the emotionless trance he caused. The family threw out the adoption papers they planned to sign in a month on their 1-year anniversary together. They sent him back to the group home he despised. He was hurt and petrified. It was that day Hitoshi vowed never to trust another foster family again. He was barely 5 years old. As Denki Kaminari grew older, his mother watched him carefully. More carefully than she had watched the 2 daughters before him. The bruises and scars on her son's body couldn't all be from his own clumsiness. Besides, since he got his quirk, he had been trying in vain to become more aware and concise in his movements. It's a hero's quirk, Mom. I gotta be prepared. Denki knew this truth too. He was young, but he knew his body well enough to know that bands of purple and blue-green around the skin of his upper arm were not from anything he had come into contact with. Those bruises looked like a grip from someone much stronger and bigger than himself. Besides, no matter how hard he pressed into them, they never hurt like bruises did. There was no pain on his end, no tender spots where the discoloration was. So, when Denki got home from school, throwing his backpack on the ground by the front door and his sister yelped when she saw his face, he knew he had to tell someone. Had to figure out what was going on. It wasn't normal. Oh my God, Denks, what happened? Kaminari was 7 now, still ever the jokester. He figures this is some kind of prank from his middle sister to get him back from the fake electrocution prank he played on her the night before. He held up one eyebrow, honoring her perceived subterfuge from where she sat on the couch. What are talking about, peeps? Your eye, doofus? He noticed she was a little pale. Either she got really good at acting for a 9-year-old, or something really was wrong. From the kitchen, Denki heard a refrigerator close and watched as his eldest sister peeked her head out from behind the wall to gander at Denki. When she saw him, her eyes widened. She stepped towards him fast and quickly shoved the piece of mochi she was eating onto his left eye. Over Denki's protests of, "Dude, what? I'm fine, seriously. What is wrong with you people? You're gonna get flour in my eyeball." The eldest called out. "Mum, yo," was heard from their mother's room. "Denki has a black eye." "What?" Denki exclaimed, finally shoving off his eldest sister and dusting off the flour from his face. He heard his mother's footfalls come closer, and looked into her eyes when she crouched down in front of him to wipe off some flour from his cheek. She sent his sister a look that said, "Really? What? I thought it would be cold." She fumed in annoyance, crossing her arms, then taking another annoyed bite of her dragon fruit mochi. "Mom," Denki said seriously, "I promise, I didn't do anything. I don't know how it got there. Stuff like this has kinda been happening a lot lately." His mom looked away from him, her eyes set looking at a horizon Denki couldn't see. He noticed that she was dressed for work, scrubs and tennis shoes. She worked at a small local hospital during nights, and was a waitress during the day. Denki always admired how hard she worked and still found time for him and his siblings. Yeah, I know, she said with a resigned nod. It's from your soulmate. All 3 Kaminari children yelled out a what? Toro's was muffled from the mouthful of mochi, and she ended up coughing after the exclamation, trying to get mochi out of her windpipe. Your sisters both have a different kind of soul bond than you. Peeps has a counter to count down to the first time she meets her soulmate, Toro has their first word said to her, and you have a very special kind that allows any kind of mark on your skin to be shared with your soulmate. And I'm afraid that your soulmate has been having a rather rough time lately. She traced the black eye with her thumb, ran a hand through his blonde locks, and sent him a small, sad smile. Denki's lip wobbled and he felt tears burn his eyes. When he looked up at his mom, her figure was distorted from the tears that began to fall. I wanna help. How do I help them, Ma? Ever my little hero? She brought him into a big bear hug and took a deep breath in. Why don't you do something nice for them? You can see everything on their skin, but they can see everything on yours too. Denki perked up suddenly. He tapped his mom's back with his open palm rapidly, letting her know that he wanted to go. A palpable eagerness wafted off him, despite his teary eyes. Mom, you're a genius. I know exactly what I'm gonna do. He looked up at her, excited, golden sunset eyes full of determination. She smiled at him widely. Good. Now, get to work, little hero. Then, Denki was speeding out of the living room and to the crafts table in the 2 youngest's shared bedroom. The footsteps stopped just short though and turned right back around. He tackled his mom in another fierce hug and bolted back again, yelling over his shoulder, "Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Have fun at work. Love you. Love you too. Don't forget to do your homework." She turned to her 2 daughters. "Make sure he does his homework for me?" "Sure thing," Toro the eldest said, moving to sit down next to Peeps on the couch, final bite of mochi in hand. "No promises," Peeps snarked, laying her legs out over Toro only to have them shoved off onto the floor. "Alright then. I'm off. Dinner's in the fridge with instructions. Call me if you need anything." "We know, Mom," Peeps said, a fondness in her voice and golden eyes. "Now get going. The sick need you." Her mom let out a soft laugh, opening the front door and stepping into the threshold. Alright, I'm good as gone. Love you girls." A chorus of "you two" just followed suit, and right before the door shut behind her, Miss Kaminari called out, "And do your homework." The girls groaned exaggeratedly, letting themselves fall back into the couch in an inflated sense of pique. Hitoshi Shinsou was locked in his cramped room because he spoke again. His fosters had berated him for coming home from school late, by 5 minutes no less, and he had tried to explain to them why. His rebuttal fell on infuriated, deaf ears. He broke one of their rules and he got punished for it. Now, he had a black eye and bruising around his wrist leading up to his forearm from where his fosters had manhandled him into the room. They could have just asked him to go, he would have obliged. In every home he was in, Hitoshi was treated like a threat. He was 7 now, which meant he was getting pretty old to be adopted, but it also meant that he had superior control of his quirk now. He never used it though. He loathed it. His quirk is what labeled him evil. It made him a villain before he even had the chance at becoming a hero. As soon as his quirk appeared, Hitoshi Shinsou was rejected by society. He would never forget that. So, Hitoshi stayed in his locked room. He yearned in some deep part of his chest to be loved. His stomach ached to be cared for. Hitoshi wanted to be a hero, he wanted to save people. Maybe that was naive, maybe it was too optimistic for someone like him, but Hitoshi believed it. It was an innate truth that stuck to his core like gum on a hot sidewalk. He would be a hero and save the society that tried to bury him alive. Hitoshi looked at his bruises, at the physicality of rejection and hatred his supposed family had for him. He was here maybe 2 months now? He didn't really keep track much anymore. They all treated him the same. At some point, the houses and faces and streets and hands all smeared into one amalgamate of similarity. He couldn't really tell one from the other and didn't care enough to try. In that locked room, Hitoshi watched in shock as colors spread along his bruising arm. It was like there was an invisible paintbrush covering up the bruises with greens and blues. He was transfixed. All he could do was stare as his forearm became a messy masterpiece before his eyes. He tried to touch it, dab at it slightly to see if it would rub off, but it didn't. It was as if the painting was just a projection on his skin. He couldn't touch it or feel the strokes, but he could see it slowly manifesting on his skin. Hitoshi's frown went away, which was a rare feat in itself. He tried guessing what it was. There was green below a light blue, so a sky? Hitoshi's lips twitched up when he was proven right by a sun and some clouds appearing in the light blue. The painting itself was pretty sloppy overall, nothing like the professional ones Hitoshi had seen on the internet, but he thought it looked better that way. Hitoshi looked around his locked room for a pen to add to the drawing. When he finally found a marker and uncapped it, the painting had some sunflowers in the fields of green grass. Hitoshi decided he liked sunflowers. They were pretty and big, and a golden yellow color that filled Hitoshi with an irrational sense of comfortable warmth. Hitoshi concentrated on his addition to the painting, tongue peeking out from behind his lips as he drew. He hoped it made sense, but it mostly just made him grin. Hitoshi didn't remember the last time he grinned this hard, or at all. He drew a little spaceship over the fields. It had a little smiling alien in it and also had a tractor beam directed below it. In the tractor beam he drew a little cow with big bug eyes to make it look surprised. He also gave the sun some sunglasses, because somebody had to protect it from its own harsh rays. He felt a little bad that all he could use to add to the picture was a black marker, but then he saw more lines forming next to the surprised cow. Hitoshi found himself taken aback by how much fun he was having, by how eager he was to see what the picture did next. Hitoshi let himself melt into a fit of quiet giggles as the new lines turned into a text box and the word. To the side of the picture, Hitoshi wrote a little note saying, "I like your picture." An arrow pointed to the opposite side of his arm where no paint resided, and Hitoshi followed it. A message began to be written out by somebody else. "Thanks. I like it too. Thanks for your help, the cow was my favorite part." Hitoshi smiled. "Moo." Hitoshi wrote back, grinning again. How did he do that so often when talking to some unknown entity writing on his skin? Maybe he was finally losing it. Hitoshi scoffed at the idea, barely 7 years old and already clinically insane. It took another moment for the reply to even begin writing itself out, but eventually it came. "Ah, I just laughed really hard. I think I may have woken up my sister. Oops. Anyway, I'm glad you're funny or else this whole thing would be pretty boring." "What do you mean?" Hitoshi wrote, going back and underlining the words "this whole thing." "We're soulmates, that's how I can see what you write and you can see what I write." Smiley face. "Really? Soulmates?" Hitoshi noted they were slowly running out of room on his arm. "Yeah. Apparently our skin, mirrors each other? If that makes sense?" Hitoshi felt his heart drop. "So, can you see everything? If it shows up on your skin, then yeah." Hitoshi felt his good mood vanish. What had he been doing to his soulmate this whole time? "I'm sorry." "What? For the bruises." "It's okay. I wanted to help, but I didn't really know how. That's why I started the painting." Another arrow was drawn once his counterpart ran out of room on his forearm, pointing up towards his shoulder. "And I should be the sorry one. I didn't even do anything to help you. But you did. The painting made me feel a lot better and I had fun. Thank you for trying to make me feel better. That's more than most would do. Anytime, soulmate. I hope you're doing okay, and if you ever aren't just right to me, yeah? Yeah. And you too." "I will. Thanks. You can call me KD by the way." "KD. You can call me SH then." Hitoshi wrote back, a soft, relaxed smile on his face for the first time in a very long time. They were just about out of room, so Hitoshi was surprised to see KD write one last thing. That night was the first time Hitoshi slept well enough to feel invigorated in the morning and to remember the dream he had about a sunflower field under cloudy blue skies. He only had one person to thank for it. Hitoshi knew he shouldn't get his hopes up. Every other time he had proved to be a hurtful letdown, but maybe this would be okay. Maybe fate was something he could believe in. In this beginning, maybe there was hope. Denki Kaminari loved talking to Sage. They hadn't talked much about names or any direct identifiers, and Denki was okay with that. He knew one day they would meet, And that day would be the best day of his life. So yeah, he could wait. Didn't mean he wanted to though. Whilst Denki yearned to see the sleepy boy he knew was on the other side of their soul bond, he figured it would be better to get to know him first. So, they kept talking and drawing and listening and recommending their favorite movies and books to one another. The nice thing was, their schedules usually coincided pretty well. Denki usually went to bed earlier than SH, and got up earlier too. His soulmate would usually leave little messages for him to wake up to sometime after Denki went to sleep, so Denki returned the favor when he woke up. Sometimes, Denki felt like he was closer to the purple ink on his skin than he was to anyone else in the world. Whenever Denki noticed a new bruise appear, especially ones that looked really dark, he would distract his soulmate as much as possible. He didn't know how else to help, and some night left him feeling utterly useless. So, he'd draw funny cartoons or talk about his day or his family, or he'd do his best to paint his soulmate a masterpiece on shared skin. Sometimes he would ask SH questions too. Nothing too personal unless it seemed like something his counterpart wanted to share. It was nice. Really nice. Denki loved every minute of it and he felt so lucky to have such a cool soulmate. I need to tell you about this weird dream I had last night. Denki wrote with the yellow gold glitter pen he started using a few years back. SH used to tease him for it, but Denki knew the guy loved it. Did you meet the Pope or something? Dude, the Pope wishes he met me in a dream. No, it was fucking weird. So, I got up in the morning, went to go get breakfast, when I realized my sister is making pancakes. Glorious. Here, have some. Denki drew his best shitty sketch of a pile of syrupy pancakes. Anyway, I'm like, dude, pancakes. And my sister turns around and she has a fucking octopus for a face? Thank you. Sounds like fun. It was not fun, especially after my other sister came out of the fridge like that creepy kid from The Ring and started making squid-like noises. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted pancakes, dude. Thanks. And then, a fucking dog walks in my house. I don't own a dog, and it has a squid face too. So, I'm like freaking out, right? Then it just ends. I wake up, never knowing what actually happened to me or the pancakes. What a loss. Those pancakes could have been great. Oh, and I guess you too. You guess? Please tell me, SH, are you a dream interpreter at all? I need to know what this all means. You're in luck, kid. I am, in fact, the most well-versed human on the planet in dream interpretation. Thank the Dream Pope. What's it all mean, Doc? If I tell you, I may have to kill you. Are you up for that kind of risk? Oh, God, give it to me straight. Am I ever allowed to eat pancakes again? Or will my whole family plus one random dog be turned into squid-faced people? Your dreams? Their meaning. They are telling you. You're gay. Hitoshi Shinsou has too much fun messing with his soulmate. It's just that, it's so easy and so entertaining and his soulmate doesn't seem to mind. It took Hitoshi a while to get comfortable with KD. Lots of long conversations and maybe too personal of questions, but in the end, KD seemed to legitimately care about him in a way that nobody ever had before. He pretty much let Hitoshi ask or do whatever he wanted as long as he didn't ignore him. They had a lot more in common than Hitoshi realized too, which he learned mostly after a time KD went to some boy's birthday sleepover when they were around 11 years old. Surprisingly, Hitoshi had woken up earlier than his soulmate, because KD stayed up late the night before and overslept. Hitoshi had softly padded to his bathroom to brush his teeth and nearly had an aneurysm. His face was covered in large, insulting words. He noticed immediately that they were written by a thick, black marker that nagged Hitoshi as possibly permanent. They also weren't in KD's cute, sloppily rushed handwriting. A hot flash of anger washed through Hitoshi as he read the ink on his face. The biggest one was written across his forehead and read loser. Smaller words were written across his cheekbones, down his jawline and temples. Dumbass. Useless. Sissy. Annoying. But. Idiot. Girly. Hyperactive. Freak. Nobody. Hitoshi wished he could wash it all off from his side of the soul bond, but it wasn't printed on his skin. Hitoshi didn't think any of the words were true either. In fact, he knew they weren't. He had grown up with KD. He knew him like the back of his hand. He knew how tall he was, an inch beneath Hitoshi. For now. And when his last growth spurt was 2 months ago. He knew his favorite color, lavender, like the pen Hitoshi wrote in. His favorite food, tied between his mom's onigiri or microwavable chicken nuggets with a surplus of ketchup. He knew his sisters' names and how he had a single mother supporting all 3 of them. How he could braid hair like a professional and how his mother's family lived in Spain. The only thing he didn't know was maybe what his voice sounded like, or how his fingers fit in Hitoshi's, or if his smile lit up his whole face or just the corners, or if his soulmate really was as bright as the sun. Hitoshi wondered if he'd feel just as safe and warm in the arms of this sunflower boy as he did reading and tracing over the yellow gold words left on his skin. He knew that KD was always kind enough to make a shit day good, or at least make it a great deal less shitty. So, Hitoshi decided to do the same. He started writing his lavender words on his arms, and then his legs, and then his chest and between his fingers and then the soles of his feet. When he was done filling in every space on his body that he could reach, Hitoshi looked at himself in the mirror at his body covered in lavender script and thought for a second he looked covered in pleasant tattoos. He hoped KD didn't freak out, at least not in a bad way. He hoped he saw the words and felt the care Hitoshi was desperately trying to convey. Because while it was terrifying, Hitoshi did care. He cared more about stupid glittery pen marks, and the boy behind them, than he'd like to admit. Denki woke up to an empty, unfamiliar house. He was sleeping on a green couch with no blankets or pillows, and when he sat up his neck twinged like he slept on a nerve. He yawned, stretched and rubbed a hand down his face. He sniffed the air as he looked around to find any of the other boys who had also spent the night there. It would be hard to miss 5 other preteens if they were anywhere near Denki. The air smelled stale. Like disinfectant? Hand sanitizer? Closer. He dropped his hand back into his lap and stared at the black smudges on it, incomprehensibly. Then he got the smell. Permanent marker. Shit. Denki grabbed the plastic bag he was keeping his overnight stuff in and ran to the closest bathroom. He was grinning but just slightly, thinking of how funny the prank would be and how confused his soulmate must be. He wondered what they wrote. Maybe stupid Kesha lyrics? A clown face? The number to a Shrek hotline? Obscure meme references? That's what he would have written. Denki's grin fell when he saw the bold, black words on his face. And every one carefully. His lower lip wobbled. This wasn't a fun prank. This was hurtful and intended to be. Last night was the first time he had told anybody other than his soulmate about how he didn't really have a dad. He lived with his mom and his sisters, and that was enough for Denki. Besides, he liked braiding hair and painting nails. But these boys treated him cruelly, laughing at him and prodding at his insecurities like it was fun. He looked under the sink for something to get it off with. A towel, a robe, fuck even hydrogen peroxide would do. Something to wipe the words away 'cause it hurt to look at them, at himself, and he couldn't stand the thought of his soulmate thinking this was him. Denki found a mint-colored towel, debated on whether or not to ruin it with the black marker, and used it anyway. Screw this kid and his parents for raising him like that. Screw all of them. He scrubbed with soap and water, got some in his eye at some point, and kept rubbing his skin raw until the black wouldn't fade anymore. The words were still there, faded to a dull, but visible gray. As frustrated tears pooled in his eyes, Denki took out his iPod Touch and opened the messaging app. His mom said he was too young for a phone, but let him have his sister's old iPod for his 11th birthday. He didn't know if she really believed that or if they just didn't have enough money for a new phone, but he appreciated it nonetheless. Denki started feeling claustrophobic within the confines of the off-white walls. He needed out of this house he didn't know and this bathroom he crumbled in. Message to Totoro 10:37 a.m. Hey, can you pick me up now? Denki's eldest sister was 16 as of last week, which meant she could drive on her permit without an adult in the car. She had been driving to and from the convenience store for the past week until their mom yelled at her to pay some gas money if she was going to go places with no reason. Message to Meet 10:38 a.m. What? I thought mom was coming to get you at 11:30. Message to Totoro 10:40 a.m. Yo, plans change. Can you just come pick me up now? Please. Message to me 10:41 a.m. On my way. Denki let out an uneven breath he didn't know he had been holding. Thankfully, Toro knew him well enough to know he was serious for once. He sighed and looked around the small bathroom, tapping his fingers on the counter. There was a candle of Jesus's face sitting to his left, a shower curtain with a scene resembling the Windows startup screen, some fancy citrus hand soap. God, this house was so different from his own. He realized with a start that Sleepyhead must have seen the words by now, it being after 10 o'clock on a Saturday. He felt worry and guilt gnawing at the pit of his stomach. Quickly, he looked down at the back of his left hand for a splice of lavender, whilst reaching for his yellow gold glitter pen from somewhere in the plastic bag. "Hope you're okay." Was waiting for him. There was an arrow pointing up the sleeve of his jacket. Denki practically ripped his jacket off and looked over his left arm. It was lavender words. Many, many lavender words. Gentle, creative, enthusiastic, smart, caring, lovable, excessively joyful, energetic, wonderful, beautiful, empathetic. Denki nearly short-circuited. He let out a laugh that sounded suspiciously like a sob. He traced the words with his right hand, then realized there were even more on his other arm. The words slowly crept up his arm and into his short sleeve. His eyes widened. He checked the door behind him, making sure it was still locked, before lifting his shirt up. Holy fuck, he thought as he saw lavender everywhere. He felt a giddy warmth blossom in his chest and on his cheeks, and he felt weirdly vulnerable. He kind of felt like crying again, but for a whole new reason. His soulmate did all this? Just for him? Denki did his best to read them all carefully. Every single word was something kind or admirable. Something his soulmate actually thought about him. A tightly wound knot in his stomach wound a little tighter, and Denki wished he could hug the boy behind the lavender words. Wished he could tell him just how important they were to him. A faint ding from his iPod allowed his eyes to wander from his chest, his arms, his lavender gifts. Message to, meet 10:54 a.m. Outside. Message to, Totoro 10:55 a.m. Could be right there. Thanks. Denki shoved his shirt down, wrinkling it in the process, and put his jacket back on, letting his iPod rest in its pocket. He grabbed his bag of stuff in one hand and his glitter pen in the other. He ran out of the bathroom, tore through the house and out the front door. As he approached the car, he slowed down a bit. He didn't need to seem too desperate. He slung open the car door and hopped in, pointedly keeping his face looking out the window. He could feel Toro's eyes picking away at him. She could probably see the writing from where she was sitting. She waited a moment, seeing if Denki would say anything before seemingly letting it go and starting the car. "You hungry?" she asked, pulling away from the curb. Denki opened his mouth to answer, but his empty stomach decided to answer for him. It let out the loudest, most humiliating growl he had ever heard from it in his entire life. It started off as a low grumble, but nearing the end of its tirade, it heightened in pitch and sounded like a strangled cat. A moment of stunned silence passed. Then the two began speaking loudly through shocked laughter. "Was that your stomach?" Toro laughed. "Oh my God, that wasn't real." He replied just as amused. "Like," she gasped for breath between laughs, "I thought you were joking. How could I have voluntarily made that sound? I don't know. But, oh my God, it sounded like a strangled cat. An organist with no idea what they're doing. A really bad trumpet player. Gang orca's mating call? Gross." Denki said, shooting her a disgusted look and racking his brain for more examples. His sister beat him to the punch. "A regular donkey." "A donkey? How dare you?" Denki faced her, pseudo-irritated mirth apparent in his eyes. "If you weren't driving, I would so kill you right now." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, letting out the rest of their breathy chuckles. Denki thought about his soulmate. SH would have had even better examples, and Denki bet he had a nice laugh too. Maybe it was light and fluttery like the lavender on his skin. Maybe it was supple like molasses and dark like his humor. Maybe it was... Denki nearly slapped himself in the forehead when he realized he forgot to reply to his soulmate's gesture. He quickly uncapped his pen and wrote out below his hand's previous lavender message. "Thank you, Love. He drew a cat head with heart eyes beside the heart for good measure too. He knew SH liked them, and this was the first time Denki ever felt really understood and cared for by someone who wasn't his immediate family. It was nice. It made the world feel less harsh. You're welcome. Are you okay? I will be. Thanks to you. You're awful quiet, Toro said, slowing down to stop at a red light. Once they were stopped, she glanced at him from the corner of her eye. Oh, you're writing. Sorry. I know. It's fine. He capped his pen and turned to her in his seat. Just had to say thanks. So? His sister said, lifting an eyebrow but keeping her eyes on the road as they started moving again. So, what's for breakfast? Denki puts his feet up on the dash, like he knows he can't do when his mom is in the car. He sees his sister's lip quirk up at the edges a little bit, and Denki thinks she knows his mood has shifted to something lighter. Denny's. You want your usual, you big pancake nerd? Yes. Pancakes. 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 Denki chants as they pull into the drive-thru. Denki lets his eyes drift back to his hand as Toro orders their food. There's no reply sitting next to his thanks to you, but Denki thinks that's because his soulmate got flustered and didn't know what to make of it. He smiles at the back of his hand before a bag of food is being shoved in his face. Take it, you gremlin. You're costing me money. His sister is occupied with taking another bag from the window and putting the vehicle back into the right gear to park in the lot. What money? You're like, bro. We all are. Denki narrows his eyes at her, watching as she blanches slightly. Unless Toro's eyes widen just a fraction, but it's enough for Denki to shout, pointing a finger in his face. You're making money somehow. Now spilled. What are you up to? Toro sighs, scratching the back of her head, may have started a small business. At school. You did what? Chill. It's not like drugs or anything stupid. She clarifies, giving him a look. I just sell soda and junk food at school, 'cause they put in that new nutritional rule. I wouldn't do anything to seriously jeopardize my future. Not now anyway. Denki blinked up at her. But, look, I won't get caught. I'm careful, and I've got my quirk to see if shit ever hits the fan. It's ideal. This way I can help out mom with college costs, and help fund my gremlin siblings too. Toro smiles down at Denki and ruffles his hair, gently, a habit Denki realized she picked up from their mother. Now eat. Those pancakes will get cold and you will complain about them. This, Denki thought, was why Toro was going into medicine and he was going into heroics. Sure, Denki was smart. Sometimes. On occasion. But his siblings, like Toro, were clever. All the siblings were pretty ambitious and good when facing down danger, but Toro knew exactly what she wanted and how she was going to attain it. Toro's quirk worked really well for what she wanted to do, Denki continued to think as he munched on his pancakes. Basically, Toro could see many possible outcomes of any one decision at any given time. She could see what would happen if she decided to go to IHOP instead of Denny's, or if she didn't come pick up Denki when she did, or if any adults were going to walk around the corner and find her selling junk food to her classmates. Toro wanted to be some kind of doctor working in the ICU and helping decide what the best course of action would be for a certain patient. Denki thought that was benevolent, but also very clever. After the two Kaminari siblings finished their breakfasts, Toro opened up the center console and pulled out a small, baby blue packet of something. She pulled out a wipe and motioned for Denki to come closer. So it was visible this whole time. He knew it. Denki obliged and leaned forward, allowing his sister to gently swab at his face with it. So, I'm going to need those pricks' names, Denks? Toro said in a steel voice. Denki raised an eyebrow. But, so you can go and pull that protective older sister card? Sorry, but that trope is way overused. Come up with something more original. His sister scoffed at him, but he could hear the smile in her voice. First of all, rude. Second of all, I was actually going to give them to Peeps so she could summon evil spirits to haunt them inescapably for the rest of their lives. But, you know, the overprotective older sister approach could work too. Denki laughed and Toro smiled down at him. I think I got it all, she said in a smaller, doleful voice. Then, her tone changed into one of suggestion. Well, everything except what's from your soulmate. Denki looked at her, eyebrows rising towards his hairline. Did he write on his forehead or something too? Quickly pulling down the car's visor, he looked at his forehead and cheeks and his neck, but there was nothing there. He looked to his sister with desperate inquiry in his narrowed eyes. She gave him a pointed, unentertained look, before pointing to the bit of exposed flesh on his leg of all things. His pajama pants had ridden up where his feet rested on the dashboard. No freaking way, he said, examining the lavender compliments. There too? Passionate. Intriguing. Funny. Cute. Thoughtful. Sweet. Your soulmate must really like you, his sister said, started the car back up for their drive home. I don't know how, but I guess it's possible. Denki gave her shoulder a light punch, but smiled brightly all the same. It was late at night. Well, early for Hitoshi but late for KD. Neither of them could get to sleep that night, so KD stayed up with his golden glitter pen and Hitoshi led him with a flashlight under his covers and a lavender pen in hand. He was careful not to wake his fosters, but this particular house wasn't very observant. They were heavy sleepers and kept him on his own for the most part, letting their other foster kids sleep together in the room next door. Hitoshi was glad for the solitude, but some nights felt too lonely. Hitoshi and his soulmate were both going to become heroes. That's what they decided a long time ago, and KD decided that they should apply for the same hero school. For fun, he said. Hitoshi wasn't sure if it was a good idea, but he also had a soft spot for the stupid gold-yellow glitter pen that inked his skin in the early mornings, and yeah, maybe he did want to meet him one day. Maybe that day was soon. Yet Hitoshi was wary. He didn't want his soulmate to think differently of him if they met in person. They were both 14 now. Hitoshi knew he was visibly not the most well-rested. He was pretty lanky from lack of good meals due to his fosters leaving him to fend for himself on that front. If Hitoshi never mentioned he was awake at night to go get food from the pantry and not get caught, then he must have accidentally skipped over that information, honestly, and he was way taller now. Almost 4 whole inches taller than Denki. So, Hitoshi didn't think he was really that attractive or good at socializing, and KD is obviously both of those things. Hitoshi fears he is the moon eclipsing the sun, uprooting the sunflower boy. He doesn't want KD to have to live with a soulmate who gets bruises and scars and lives in trepidation every second he's home. If someone as bright as KD was paired with Hitoshi, he was afraid he would ruin his reputation too. KD's soulmate is a villain? He can hear them asking, poor guy. Better not hire him though, just to play it safe. Like he always does, Hitoshi warns KD. They're both in weird headspaces at this late hour, searching for comfort and reassurance in lachrymose camaraderie. People hate me because of my quirk. It's like they won't even give me the time of day to know me because they're too scared of me. They think I'm a villain at 13 KD. People look at me and my quirk is all they see. Well, then they're fools. I know you and I think you're incredible. I know you'll be a great hero. I know you'll defy all their stupid assumptions and ignorance. You really are amazing, and unfortunately I think I kinda get it. How other people view you only as your quirk. It took a moment for KD to continue, and Hitoshi held his breath. When he saw what was written after, it felt like someone punched him in the stomach. Sometimes I think my quirk is the only reason people actually like me. I know that I come across as annoying sometimes. Most of the time. I'm loud and I never sit still for too long because I just can't. It's hard to focus in class and I think my teachers would have given up on me if I weren't trying to get into UA. Because then they get to say they taught a dead-brain student enough to get them into the best hero school in the country. And my classmates too. They only talk to me about UA or heroic stuff. And then, if I get off track, they just stop listening or walk away or snap their fingers in my face like I'm some kind of animal that needs to be trained. I'm fucking tired of it. It's like you're the only person who actually likes me and you're contractually fate-bonded with me. Shit, I'm sorry. I'm such a jackass. I'm lucky to have a quirk like mine and I shouldn't complain about it when you've got it so much worse. I'm really sorry. Hitoshi is afraid of saying the wrong thing. How is he supposed to comfort again? What would his soulmate want to hear from him? Oh God, Hitoshi is painfully inept at anything that has to do with being social, being gentle. All he knows are agonizing words and hurtful hands thrown his way. He's never learned how to be gentle. Well, except from KD. Maybe he could do this. What would KD say to him? The first thing Hitoshi did was scribble out the last paragraph KD wrote, and put a note of, "That's BS and we both know it." The apology was unnecessary, and Hitoshi didn't want his soulmate to feel like he would ever judge him for his feelings. That's not true. If I didn't like you, I wouldn't talk to you. I wouldn't try. But I do try and I do like you very much. I think you're incredible too. Besides, if there's anything I've learned in middle school, it's that people suck. Hopefully high school will be better. For both of us. I hope you're right, D. I really fucking do. If it's not, we'll make it. Usually I'm not much of an optimist, but I think, with you, I'll be okay wherever I am. I'm gonna cry. You're so sweet and I think so too. Hitoshi watched as a squiggly gold halo was drawn around two of his lavender words. With you. One morning, Kaminari Denki wakes up to a reflection that makes him believe his soulmate might be dead. It's way too early, but Denki has a teeny, tiny, impatient bladder that wakes him up at 3 in the morning to use the restroom. It's in a passing moment as Denki is headed back to his room, about to turn off the bathroom light as he leaves, when he catches his reflection. He stops breathing. There is blood that isn't his running down half of his face. There are black and purple bruises that aren't his, wrapping around his neck like fingers that grabbed and squeezed and suffocated. Denki lifts his shirt and finds more, oh god, more on his stomach and his ribs and his back, and his whole torso has been battered so much he doesn't remember what his skin's natural color is. Denki runs. The house is dark, no moonlight flooding through windows to illuminate the wooden floors, but Denki knows his way around like an expert. He knows where all the sharp corners lie and which floorboards creak and moan. He forgets how humid these summer nights are, and how stuffy it makes everything around him feel. Somewhere in his miscellaneous racing thoughts, his mind takes the time to notice how the crickets are still chirping and the cicadas are still singing despite this night being bleaker than anything Denki has faced before. It's a month away from UA's entrance exam. Things were supposed to get better, they were going to meet and make new friends, and Denki was going to hold his soulmate for the first time. He couldn't help the thought that he might not ever get to. Denki doesn't know how to fix this, doesn't think he can, but does know one person who always knows what to do in tough situations. The unwavering strength and calm demeanor when confronting truly purtifying foes. Denki runs to his mom. He opens her door in a flurry and flicks on the light to her room, filling the space with buzzing, honey-colored lights. His mom is splayed out, half under the covers and sluggishly moving an arm over her eyes, mumbling and almost incoherent. "Turn off the lights, it's too early." "Mom," Denki whispers, walking over to the side of her bed and placing a trembling hand on her arm. His voice sounds wrong to his own ears. It's shaky, wet, and it encroaches in the quiet darkness and the tranquil night. It's a needle popping the balloon of peaceful, humid, honey, summer nights. "Mom, please wake up." There must have been something propelling in his voice because, just like that, she's pulling her arm away, looking out with wide eyes. She gasps when she sees his red-run face and holds out her soft hands to place on his cheeks, but she hesitates. Her hands still just inches away from him, as if she's afraid she'll hurt him. Denki grabs her hands, places them gently on his face. "I'm okay, Mom," he tells her, but I think something's wrong. She keeps staring at him with those wide, glassy eyes. "Mom, please. How do I help?" His voice catches in his throat and then he feels the familiar prickling in the corners of his eyes. God, why couldn't his soulmate connection be anything other than this? He can't keep watching his soulmate get hurt and do nothing about it. It makes him feel so wholly useless. The fan above their heads whirled and creaked a steady rhythm into the night. "Oh." His mom seemed to come back to herself, a stealing determination slowly residing in her blinking eyes once again. "I'm sorry." She took a deep breath and did what mothers do. She took care of it. Denki watched her tear through the room like a tornado, putting on her socks and a jean jacket over the old rock band t-shirt she wore to bed, grabbing her wallet, purse, phone, keys. Putting on her glasses, she paused to look at Denki for just a moment. "Go get ready to leave." Denki nodded, spun around on his foot and left to tear through his own room for any essentials he'd need. He didn't question her, he knew she'd tell him where they were going eventually. In fact, Denki was glad to be given something to do. The inadequate feeling that draped itself over him felt a little bit lighter. He and his mom met at the door, putting on their shoes in a rush, and made their way to her car quickly. As his mother looked up directions on her phone, she spoke to Denki in a quiet but commanding voice. "Denki, I need you to text the girls and let them know there was a small emergency and they don't need to worry. Tell them we're going to the nearest soulmate clinic and we probably won't be back for breakfast, so they can help themselves to whatever." "Okay," Denki said, already typing out and relaying the information to the siblings group chat. His mom pulled away from the curb, headlights peering into the slight fog obscuring the road. Without taking her eyes from the windshield, she put a hand on Denki's shoulder and squeezed. "It's gonna be okay, Denks. It's all going to be okay." Hitoshi woke up to pain. Sharp, nauseating, disorienting pain. He was faintly aware he was lying down on something cold and solid. He was acutely aware of the aching, throbbing sensation that encased his entire being, beating in time with his heart and dragging tears from his eyes. He couldn't tell where it emanated from. There were too many epicenters of hurt. Hitoshi took a deep breath and regretted it immediately. His chest and stomach were on fire and all he could do was crinkle his eyes with enough force to see dots dance in the darkness, and clenched his jaw in a grimace. He tried to keep his breathing shallow, not move his chest too much. Hitoshi stayed laying on the cold floor and tried to orient himself. Opening his eyes, he saw he was in his room. The door was locked, when wasn't it? The lights were off, and the window was closed. Moving his neck hurt, but the pain was slowly starting to numb itself from the forefront of Hitoshi's brain. He listened. There was snoring coming from his foster's bedroom. A couple's quarrel from the apartment above him. Rarely a car would drive by outside, blasting music. Sirens in the distance. Hitoshi's own shallow breathing. His head ached. Why did his mind feel so foggy? There was something wet and sticky on the side of his face. He could feel it when he blinked, and when he turned his head, saw a small puddle of red glinting up at him. In an instant, Hitoshi remembered. He needed to get up. It proved to be quite the feat, considering his head was still fuzzy, swarming with nausea and dizzy spells. That and his torso felt like somebody had hit him with a chair, which Hitoshi thought would have been kinder than what really happened. It was a slow process, beginning at the tips of his fingers and his toes. He'd move them around, making slight movements, before bending them, and soon enough he could clench and unclench his fists. He did this, working his way inwards until he could push himself up into a sitting position, gasping at the sharp pain. Hitoshi blinked, looking upwards, and tried to ground himself in something other than pain. He felt the wood grain under his palm, he smelled the musty air in the uncomfortably hot room, and listened to the muffled fight upstairs. Hitoshi breathed through it, and eventually felt the pain die down, just a little bit. Hitoshi crawled on all fours to get to the bathroom. He didn't even attempt to stand up, knowing it wouldn't have been a good idea. It was times like these that Hitoshi was thankful for the bright neon signs from the restaurants and clubs across the street from his room. Usually, they served as a barrier to Hitoshi's sleep, but now their flickering cerulean, yellow, red spilled across the floor and walls of his room, enabling him to see his whereabouts. He could make out a path to the bathroom because of the flickering, buzzing neon signs, and once he was there, he steeled his nerves. It was a slow and arduous process of pushing himself up onto the closed toilet seat, then from there, climbing unsteadily to sit on the counter next to the sink. He opened the mirror up and grabbed the small first aid kit he had hidden there. It was one of the only possessions he owned. Moving as often as Hitoshi did led to many items being lost, stolen, or broken more often than not. It was easier to own nothing than to lose something valuable. Closing the mirror, Hitoshi finally got a look at his reflection. Well, he thought through a cloudy mind, I've looked better. He poked at the drying blood on his face, and didn't really feel like he was in his body. Logically, he knew that it was his, that his consciousness resided there, but he couldn't help but feel like he was watching everything from outside himself. The only open wound was the one on the crown of his head. He studied it, coming to the conclusion that he'd probably need to stitch it up, and that it'd leave a wicked, but hidden scar. Letting out a breath that was somewhere between a sigh and a groan, Hitoshi opened up the kit with pale hands. Gently, he washed his face of the sticky red substance, then applied bits of numbing cream around the cut. He let his mind run on autopilot as he fixed himself up. This was an easy, learned familiarity. He could take care of himself just fine, even if he did lose a little bit of blood. He was fine. It was summer and Hitoshi was counting down the days to the UA entrance exam. That, he told himself, was the only reason he stayed at this particular foster home. It was violent and cruel, but it was also close to his dream school. He didn't have that certainty if he had to move foster homes again. Besides, if he could endure this every day of his life, then he could endure anything as a hero. Hitoshi was tired though. He was always tired. He didn't think he would be himself if he didn't have the all-encompassing feeling of exhaustion set in his bones. As he tied off and cut the suture's thread, he cleaned up the first aid kit, putting it back behind the mirror. His thoughts had cleared a great deal, but Hitoshi still felt lightheaded, so he opened the secret panel he made behind the mirror's shelving and took out his emergency snack stash. It had amassed 2 granola bars, 2 water bottles, and 3 bags of chips. Slowly he ate one of the granola bars, a bag of ranch-flavored chips, and had about half a water bottle. He was always hesitant to eat out of his emergency stash. He didn't know when his next meal would come or go. It was always inconsistent, unreliable, so he needed this backup in case shit ever really hit the fan and he was locked in for days on end. The summer heat felt sweltering in the tiny, cramped bedroom. It felt like there was no air in the room, just dust. Suffocating, burning dust. Hitoshi used the wall for support as he sluggishly dragged his feet over to the closed window. His chest was on fire. He thought maybe he was boiling alive in this cesspool of a room. He noticed his breath picking up slightly and decided he needed the window open now. Hitoshi pushed, reveled in the cold breeze that blew his hair back from his sweaty forehead, and let himself come back to his body completely. Leaning his head out the window, Hitoshi let his eyes fall closed. He breathed in, sighed out, and relaxed against the window pane. The throbbing in his head and chest ebbed away in the cold, night air, and Hitoshi allowed himself to simply breathe for a moment. "Hey kid." A deep, gruff voice called from somewhere to Hitoshi's right, startling him. "The fuck?" he yelped, pushing himself off the window pane and back into his room. He hovered one hand over his, now, racing heart. He blinked at the window, scrutinizing it, hoping his fosters hadn't heard his yell. From his limited field of vision of the outside, he couldn't see anything or anyone. Creeping back towards the window, Hitoshi tried to steady his heart rate. He breathed in and out, only a little unsteady. He peeked out of the window once again, the neon lights blinding him just slightly. He looked to his left, where another windowsill sat, but only an empty, cracked flower pot resided there. Looking to his right, Hitoshi found the culprit. Underneath the flashing neon lights, he could make out a figure perched on the fire escape clad in all black. Surprisingly, Hitoshi recognized the underground pro hero. He had followed different blogs about heroes with psychological quirks when he was younger. There weren't many, but Eraserhead quickly became his favorite because he was an underground hero, the kind Hitoshi aspired to be, and his quirk wasn't flashy or overpowered. Eraserhead was the first person that made Hitoshi realize he even could be a hero. "What the hell, man?" he asked the pro hero with a raised brow. Sue him, he was a little miffed at having the shit scared out of him. "Apologies. I didn't mean to startle you." Eraserhead pushed his yellow goggles up to the top of his head, narrowing his gaze at the purple-haired boy. "You okay, kid?" Hitoshi tensed and looked out at the neon signs to avoid the hero's eyes. He did his best to keep his expression neutral as he shrugged nonchalantly, saying, "I'm fine. Just a little tired." Hitoshi looked back at him. Giving him no room to ask more questions, he continued, "You're Eraserhead, right?" The hero grunted in confirmation, still fixing Hitoshi with a stare. "How'd you know that?" "Ah." Hitoshi scratched the back of his neck, feeling bashful. When I was a kid I used to look for heroes with quirks like mine. You know, psychological quirks. And you were kinda one of the only underground pros I could find." Hitoshi thinks he should shut his mouth now, but his brain has other ideas. This was probably the longest he had verbally spoken to someone in years, and he couldn't blame himself for wanting to hold tightly to it. I mean, obviously there's not much. 'Cause you're an underground hero. But just, you know, that you exist and stuff. It was cool to see someone like me, out there, I guess. When Hitoshi met Eraserhead's gaze again, he was surprised to find the hero's glare marginally softened. Hitoshi felt embarrassed by how much he babbled to a hero he admired so much. His cheeks felt hot, and he hoped his embarrassed blush wasn't apparent in the dim, colorful light. You want to be a hero? The tone wasn't judgmental. It was curious. Hitoshi appreciated it. Yeah. I'm applying to UA this year. Hitoshi rubbed the back of his neck again, looking downward. But I'm a little worried about the entrance exam. Every year's practically the same. They give advantages to powerful, physical quirks, and people like me get swept into general studies. Hitoshi lets himself lean into the window frame again, keeping his weight off his feet. He was still pretty weak and lightheaded, and he hoped it didn't show. The boy watches as Eraserhead nods a little, chin tucking into his capture weapon. That's true. You do know there's another way to make it into the heroics course. Just like that, Hitoshi is back on his feet, studying the hero in front of him, eyes wide. The pro quirks an eyebrow and one of the corners of his mouth picks up into a smirk. You can always get noticed by faculty during the sports festival. If you're good enough, anyway. Hitoshi knows that he's gaping at the man. He's staring wide-eyed, open-mouthed. This was his chance. This was his ticket. He could get into general studies, no problem. All he had to do was do well enough in the sports festival to move into the heroics course. It was unbelievable. Really? It was unbelievable. Yeah, I did it. The hero said, as if it wasn't a big deal. As if it wasn't the biggest deal in Hitoshi's life. Don't see why you couldn't? Is all Hitoshi can come up with in reply. He can't believe that really happened. His hero just scared the shit out of him and saved his future in one night. Incredible. Thanks. The hero grunted and waved him off in a don't-mention-it manner. For a while, there was silence. Hitoshi leaned against the window frame again, letting himself relax a little bit. The exhaustion was finally getting to him. His eyelids began to droop, feeling heavier than Hitoshi knew they really were. Maybe he could actually get some decent sleep for once. You look tired, kid. Eraserhead said, voicing the evident exhaustion Hitoshi felt. My name's sure new Hitoshi. He deadpanned, feeling too tired to put any emotion in it. And I'm always tired. Well, Shinsou, I suggest you get some sleep. The pro's gaze was soft again, but his tone sounded authoritative. And if you're in trouble, his eyes flashing to the apartment behind Hitoshi, I implore you to ask for help. The hero's gaze bores into Hitoshi and he couldn't look away from him. It's like he knows, which, granted, isn't that hard to figure out, but still. If Eraserhead told the authorities, Hitoshi could be placed somewhere far from UA and that would ruin everything. Hitoshi blinks, hard. If I were in trouble, I could handle it. Hitoshi thinks of golden pens sparkling on his pale skin, of dreaming and reaching and wanting. Of yearning. I'm not going to a different foster home somewhere too far from UA. I'm not losing the one good thing I've got. Losing UA would mean losing his soulmate, and Hitoshi can't handle that. He meets the hero's eyes again and sees the neon lights reflected in them. His black eyes reflect a glowing yellow in the dark, and Hitoshi has a fleeting thought of how similar they look to sunflowers. Kid. The pro keeps looking at him with a hard, intimidating gaze, and Hitoshi is terrified of what he might do. He can't lose this. Hitoshi shrinks into himself almost imperceptibly, feeling the stare as if it were the weight of the world. Except, Eraserhead just sighs in resignation. He reaches for something in his pocket and pulls out a small slip of paper. He looks over it for a moment, before holding it out towards the boy in the window. It's my personal number. Use it for emergencies or if you just need to talk. Don't hesitate to call. Hitoshi slowly reaches out a trembling arm and takes the paper from his grasp, being careful not to brush the older man's fingers. He holds it close to his body, reading and memorizing the number as best he can. Nobody has ever given him their phone number before. All he has is a shitty flip phone he was able to afford after saving up months' worth of odd jobs payment. The only numbers he had were from his fosters. Hitoshi pressed his eyes away from the paper, slipping it into his pocket and turning to Eraserhead. He bows his head to the older man. Something in his chest aches at the kindness this man showed him tonight. He didn't do anything to deserve it, and yet the hero gave some beat-up kid his time, his advice, and his telephone number. "Thank you. For your company. And the things you said," Hitoshi says quietly. He means every word. "Good night, Eraserhead." Eraserhead only stares as Hitoshi pulls himself back inside the apartment building, keeping the window open as to let the breeze through. He lays in bed, watching the neon lights cover rectangular sections of the floor and walls, discoloring them to make it seem like Hitoshi is living at the bottom of the ocean, or on the sun, or in a blood-covered room. The slip of paper in his pocket feels heavy in a comforting way, having already buried itself deep in his memory. Hitoshi drifts off to the sound of buzzing lights, quarreling neighbors, and his own shallow breathing. Denki hasn't left his room in 3 days. He hasn't left his shared room since he got back from the soulmate clinic with his mom and they told him his soulmate wasn't dead, because if he were, Denki wouldn't be able to see any marks from his side of the bond. Denki pleaded, he begged them, asking how to help, how to find his soulmate and bring him to safety. He couldn't keep watching the horrible things that happened to his soulmate and not do anything about it. Surely, there was a way they could find the boy who left lavender words and purple bruises on his skin. They were connected by fate. There had to be a way. Except, all Denki could hear, all that he could think, playing on a loop within his mind, was the nurse's words. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do." It's been 3 days since Denki started painting his skin. It was all he could think to do. He'd paint every inch of skin he could reach, the current picture never quite good enough to be sufficient for what Denki wants to paint his soulmate. His soulmate deserved a masterpiece, a work of art, an expression of how much the lavender words meant to him. They were never enough though. So, as soon as the paint would dry he would paint over it again. He would do it again and again and again and again because he had to keep repainting because his soulmate needed him and he wasn't there. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do." There is nothing Denki can do and he feels completely, innately useless. Denki doesn't let himself move from his spot on the floor, even when he's running out of paint. He doesn't let himself escape the stillness and the eerie quiet that comes with it. His limbs itch for movement, they crave to run and to gesture wildly and to hug his family and to go do something, but Denki doesn't let himself. When he heard the news that his soulmate wasn't dead, he had nearly collapsed from relief. Dread quickly filled him. That meant he was alive and badly injured. He couldn't imagine the hurt his lavender boy was going through. His soulmate was beaten half to death, and Denki wishes he could just take their pain. He wishes he could switch their spots in life. He'd do it in a heartbeat if he could, but he can't and it's killing him. So, Denki paints. Because that's all he can do. He doesn't sleep, he doesn't eat, he doesn't fucking move because he wants to go through it with his soulmate. He's so guilty it hurts, and if his soulmate's in pain then he should be too, right? After the first day passed, Denki's mom tried to talk to him. He didn't say a word, just kept painting. As the second day wound down, his eldest sister Toro brought him food and water and asked him to please eat. "Denks, we're worried about you." Today, he finds the middle sibling, Peeps, squatting next to him, eyeing his paintings with her sharply cut eyeliner over bright golden eyes. She sits there for a while watching him. Lately, Peeps had been into witchy coven-type stuff. She had always been a fan of dark things, however. As a kid she loved horror movies and any piece of media with dark humor. She collected dead, taxidermied things, and always had an interest in bugs and reptiles. Both his sisters were always way tougher than Denki. While he wanted to braid their hair and paint their nails, his sisters wanted to play samurai in the yard. Toro loved the Terminator movies, Peeps invested herself in the horror genre, and Denki liked simple rom-coms. Denki cried easily, felt emotions powerfully, deeply, and loudly, but his sisters never wavered from their strong facades. Maybe it was because he was the youngest, and his sisters always tried to be big and strong for him, but sometimes Denki felt weak compared to them. As Peeps grew, she became a very creative young woman, writing poems and short stories that she would read to Denki on occasion, the occasion being whenever her brother begged her to. Denki was really proud of her. She was 16 now, 2 years older than Denki, and she already had a few published works. She did well in school, but her no-nonsense abrasive attitude tended to veer her off a teacher's good side. Her ability to stand so strongly with her morals was something Denki usually admired about her. "Hey dude," she asked, twirling a piece of black hair around a finger. He made no sign that he heard her, but he listened. "This is stupid." There was. She could and would call out anybody for anything, and this time it just so happened to be Denki. His movements froze, the paintbrush hesitated, hovering over his skin. Maybe it was his sleep-deprived mind, or his stomach's hunger pains, but a surprising hot flash of fury burned through Denki. She didn't know what the fuck she was talking about. Her soulmate was guaranteed to meet her, and she never had to experience the things Denki did. She was rotten with luck, and she never had to try like Denki did. Never had to beg to whatever higher power there was to keep her soulmate alive and breathing. "This is stupid, Denki," she repeated. He turned to her, ferocious anger in his eyes, as he clutched the paintbrush in a tight grip. "You don't know shit, Pepita," he yelled, voice hoarse, throat tight. Peeps kept her composure, blazing eyes staying steady on Denki's. Her gaze didn't look angry. It looked sad. "Then explain it to me. You know this isn't helping you or your soulmate. You need to take care of yourself, so you can take care of him." Denki felt hot tears prickle his eyes. He was tired of crying for this specific reason over and over again. He wanted this stage of his soulmate's life to be over. He wanted him to be safe and to stay that way. "You don't understand." His voice wobbled. "This is all I can do. There are no other options. I'm all he's got and there's nothing I can do except for this." Peeps blinked at him, her gaze sad. "That's not true." Her tone was gentle. It irritated him. "You can always talk." She took the paintbrush from his shaking fist, setting aside. "But you can't do it if you're dead." Denki blinked at her, letting a few stray tears race down his cheeks. His anger had dissipated, but everything else inside him had too. There was no familiar buzz of energy humming through his body. There was no itching for movement or fast-paced, distracted thoughts. Denki felt empty. "It's been 3 days. Peeps continued. "You need to eat something. You need to sleep. You need to take care of yourself because I need my baby brother." She paused to take a steadying breath, as her voice got choked up. "And your soulmate needs you too. So, get your shit together, Denks." Denki felt drained of everything. He looked away from her bright, yellow eyes and nodded. "Yeah." He sounded like a ghost of himself. "Okay." Next to him, Peeps let out an exaggerated sigh of relief. "Thank fuck." She turned towards the open door of their shared bedroom and yelled out, "We need a banana nut muffin in here, stat." He heard the footsteps of his eldest sister briskly walking to his bedroom. She came into the room, bearing a small smile, one large muffin, and a glass of ice water. She handed them to Denki, carefully watching him eat. She pushed his oily hair back from his forehead and wrinkled her nose. "You need a bath too." She turned her gaze to Peeps, who stood up. "Can you?" "Already on it." Denki felt like he was floating through the motions. He ate, he drank, he was led to the bathroom where a tub had been filled with warm water. He got in, watching the days of piled-up paint slowly separate from his skin, wisping off into the water, and revealing harsh, angry purple-blue-greens. He let his head fall back, resting on the tub, and closed his eyes. He knew he shouldn't fall asleep here, but it was so warm and he was so tired that his mind immediately shut off. Denki had dreams of meeting a faceless boy with lavender skin in a field of green and sunflowers. "I think we need to talk about what happened. Not right now, but when you're ready." "Yeah, that's fair. For now though, it has been 4 days since I've sent you a daily pickup line." "Good." "Meaning, I am behind on my game." Don't fucking start." 1. Are you sure you're not tired? You've been running through my mind all day." "I'm always tired. You know this." 2. You must be a broom. 'Cause you really swept me off my feet. Comparing me to a broom? Really? 3. Are you my phone charger? Because without you I die." "I'm not. And if you die, I'll kill you." 4. Are you a dictionary? 'Cause you brought meaning to my life, love." "Okay, I'll admit that one was sort of sweet. Success." "Shut." Never 3 less than 3. English. Why you like this? I dunno. Ask my mom, only she knows where my chaos comes from. I would if I could, man. Dude. I just realized. One day, you're actually gonna meet my mom. And my sisters. Shit. They're gonna love you. Like, if they like you even a fraction as much as I do, they're gonna be head over heels for you. Honestly, they'll probably want to replace me with you. That's how much they'll like you. Thanks, Kitty. I don't have anyone to show you to, but if I did, I think they'd like you too. Denki was literally buzzing with nervous energy. He couldn't help the active electric current moving through his body as he paced around the house, worrying his bottom lip with anxious excitement. Today was the day. It was the day. So, he wrote to his soulmate. It's 3 hours until the entrance exam. You nervous? You wish. I already know you're freaking out. Yo. Denki's reply was immediate, cutting off whatever his soulmate was going to write next. I am. Peeps kicked me out of our room because I kept pacing and building up static electricity from my socks, and she said that it's a disaster waiting to happen, which didn't calm my nerves at all. Kitty. Breathe. Denki looked down at his half-legible statement. He didn't realize how badly his hands were shaking, but he wasn't surprised. He felt like a live wire. Maybe he was a disaster waiting to happen. You're gonna do fine. Great even. You told me your quirk was a strong, physical one, right? Denki paused pacing. He wrote remotely more legibly. Then you'll be fine. The entrance exam is pretty much geared towards quirks like yours. You shouldn't have a problem passing. Shit, really? Denki stared at the lavender on his forearm, reading the words over and over again to make sure they were real. It was a relieving. He could do this. He would go out there and prove he deserved a place in UA's heroics course. He belonged there. He had worked for it his whole life. But then, another thought occurred. One that brought Denki's relief to a halt. What about you? Denki and SH hadn't described their quirks in any detail yet. They hadn't conversed about any easily identifiable aspects of themselves either. It was mainly to get to know each other better before meeting in person, and they didn't want to accidentally run into and recognize one another before they were ready. Denki, however, did know that SH's quirk was mainly psychological. I figured that would be the case this year too. So, I applied for Gen Studies just in case. I've got a plan though. It just means I'll see you in the heroics course a little later in the year. But that's so unfair. You could easily be a better hero than me or anybody else. What the fuck? It is pretty unfair. But it's hard for people to trust quirks like mine. They see it as a threat before salvation. Okay, I know, it's just so stupid. 'Cause my quirk could be a threat just as easily. Any quirk could. Denki was pacing again, but this time from frustration. If they were so scared of quirks being used for evil, wouldn't it make more sense to bring in heroes with threatening quirks? To show that such quirks can be used for good too? Well, I hope to see you sooner than later. I'm proud of you, whichever way this turns out. Thanks a lot. I'm proud of you too. Denki watched as a short period of silence felled them. It was comfortable and familiar, warming Denki with a relaxed happiness. Are you still a nervous wreck? Or have I done my job at being a good distraction? You're the best distraction I could have ever asked for. Denki drew a sloppy smiley face with hard eyes. And yeah, thanks a lot. You're welcome. Love, okay, I need to leave now if I want to catch my train, but maybe I'll see you there. Winky face. Just like that, Denki was back to being a nervous, excited mess. Gasp. Oh my god, I didn't even think of that. What if we, holy shit, S.H? Shinsou Hitoshi stared down at his ink-covered arm and hid a small smile behind a hand. He was on the train. It was always a nice ride out to UA from his foster's place. It rode from a fairly large city, through a few empty fields and meadows, and then into Tokyo. Hitoshi liked to watch the different worlds and different lives that happened around him. Outside, farm fields and hillsides rolled past. A sunflower field brought up thoughts of his soulmate's glittery golden yellow writing. An older woman holding baskets of fresh agriculture entered the train car. A father stood, looking at his phone, while his daughter looked out the window, swaying in time with the starting and stopping of the train. A young man and young woman, sitting and holding hands while they shared a pair of earbuds. A person in a business suit, holding a briefcase, expression tense and grim. Hitoshi loved to people watch and guess what kind of life they lived. How different it was to his and in what direction their future might take. It helped pass the time. Before he knew it, Hitoshi was at the correct station, then he was walking through the testing doors and soon enough, he found himself in the middle of absolute chaos. Kids his age were fighting and taking down robots. Some had an obvious advantage due to their quirks, and others kept to their own pace. Hitoshi thought back to all his training from the past month, hoping it would lend him some ability in this test. Ever since the night he met Eraserhead, Hitoshi had thought a lot about what the hero said, and he came to the conclusion that he needed to be physically stronger. He couldn't completely rely on his quirk, he was bound to face situations like this robotic mess one day. So, Hitoshi joined a gym. Sorta. He had to practically beg the gym owner to let him clean the whole gym at the end of every day in order to use the facilities. It wasn't a usual gym either, it was Milia Parkour Gym with a few areas for weightlifting. Being able to move freely by studying parkour would help his adaptability, agility, strength, and critical thinking skills. It was fun too. Plus, it gave Hitoshi a place to be that wasn't his foster's house. KD and him had a conversation about not being able to switch fosters, so he'd try his best to be out of the house before they woke up, and in bed long after his fosters had gone in for the day. Staring at the ensuing chaos, Hitoshi was at somewhat of a loss. He couldn't rack up points quickly, but he had a plan to steadily build some up. He would lure the smallest ones into an alleyway, then he could knock their heads against the cinder block walls, effectively getting their points. The narrow space was a great opportunity for Hitoshi to use the walls as stepping stones to push off of in order to climb high enough to attack the robot's head. Minutes feeling like hours passed, and Hitoshi had been doing fairly well, running back out to the main road to lure another villain, when something hit a huge, 0-point villain. The humongous thing toppled backward, right down the main road Hitoshi was currently standing on, and he could see its colossal shadow begin blocking out the sunlight. He only gaped a second longer, before turning and running at a 45-degree angle from the stupid thing. "Run!" Hitoshi yelled, watching as other students started scrambling to not be crushed by the thing. Were the admin really just gonna let these kids die? His eyes widened as he saw a guy not moving, eyes transfixed in awe at the falling robot. He cursed himself, running to the blonde-haired fool. When he looked back, he saw the robot almost coming down upon them. Hitoshi was close. They could make it, but it'd be risky. "Watch out!" Hitoshi yelled, as he tackled the dumbfounded boy into an alleyway perpendicular to the falling colossus. He held tightly to the stranger, listening as the 0-pointer crashed through the concrete just behind them. Dust filled his vision, he felt a huge rush of air and the earth shaking beneath them, and Hitoshi smelled smoke and something fruity? He looked down and realized his nose was buried in blonde locks. He had been doing his best to shield the boy from any debris, but he accidentally got uncomfortably close. Hitoshi only moved off the boy underneath him when the tremors stopped. He pulled back, kneeling beside him. The boy was slightly smaller than himself, with blonde hair and a crazy black streak in his hair. He looked to be uninjured at first glance, only covered in a layer of dust. He stared up at Hitoshi with wide eyes. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Hitoshi asked, quiet and urgent. "Nah," he said, seeming to shake himself out of his stupor. He held his hands out in front of himself, clenching and unclenching his fists. "I'm all right," he flashed Hitoshi a dazzling smile. Thanks to you. Thanks to you." Hitoshi blinked at him. It couldn't be. There was no way. He opened his mouth to say something when the blonde boy quickly stood up, lending a hand to Hitoshi. "But really, thanks for that. I owe you one," he said, a half-smirk, half-smile on his lips. The purple-haired boy took the inviting gesture, preparing to feel a warm palm, but instead felt a small shock. He pulled back, startled by the static electricity. "Static electricity? Ah, sorry," the blonde boy yelled, looking sincerely apologetic. "It's my quirk. I promise it won't happen again. Here." He held out his hand again, and Hitoshi hesitated for a moment. He cocked up an eyebrow at the yellow-haired kid teasingly, before taking his hand. His hand was warm, and it was smaller than Hitoshi's, but it easily pulled him up to stand in front of the blonde boy. Hitoshi looked down at him, not really knowing what to say. He hadn't talked to anyone his own age in a while. Well, not verbally anyway. The stranger seemed to pick up on this though, and moved right past the silent moment. Alright. Well, thanks again, but we should get going. Timer's running out, you know? Then, the blonde was walking backwards away from Hitoshi and out of the alley. He raised two finger guns and winked at him. I owe you. Maybe lunch sometime? Hitoshi's face froze in a confused deadpan. Was this kid fucking serious? I'll see you around, stranger. He yelled over his shoulder with a wave. Then the golden boy was gone. Hitoshi stared after him for a long moment, before mentally slapping himself. He had to focus. He had a plan. So, how'd you do? I did it. I can't fucking believe it, holy shit. When I got the news, I accidentally used my quirk and my sisters got really mad at me. Whoops. Proves you right. But I'm happy for you. That's really cool. What about you? Didn't pass. I kind of figured this would happen though. Got into the top spot for Gen Studies though. All I have to do now is work twice as hard to get into the hero course. You better watch out, dude. I could take your place. Carrot. Yeah, threaten me later. I think this calls for some kind of celebration though. We did it. We got in SH. Things are finally going to start getting better. Yeah. I'm hopeful at least. So, what do you want to watch? We can pick a time to start playing it too. I dunno, you pick this one. I picked the last one. Fine. But I know it's just because you don't want to read my insults of your favorite movies halfway through. I hate that you know you're right. Whatever, just pick the movie, nerd. And it better not be one of those shitty animated films made by some guy in his basement like you always. Actually, it was made in a house, not a basement. This one's called Joshua and the Promised Land, and it's the best worst thing I have ever seen. It's on YouTube. Buckle up, bitch. This one is a wild ride. Please. Do not make me watch this. The ho-ho. I'm only enlightening you on the masterpiece that is Joshua and the Promised Land. Now go get your snacks. We hit play at 8 o'clock. God damn it. Fine. You're lucky you're my soulmate. With you as my soulmate, I'm the luckiest guy in the world, Katie. Oksujjisi. You broke me. I'm dead now. Things were better, Kaminari Denki decided after his first day at UA. His class had some pretty interesting people, and they all seemed to be, at worst, only mildly annoyed by his presence. He and the other 1A students were still in the midst of getting acquainted with one another, but Denki found that everyone in the hero course shared his same drive, his same guttural motivation to become a great hero. To be a strong helping hand in the face of danger. His teacher kinda scared Denki, but he was fun to doodle whenever Denki's brain decided it was time to tune out and get distracted by every thought that every person in the entire world had ever had. He even sat close enough to the front so that he wouldn't have to squint to look at the board. He was making progress. Sort of. It was just that there were so many distracting things happening all at once, and Denki's ADHD grabbed and pulled his attention to everything but what he should have been focusing on. Come on, focus on the man's words. He's explaining something important. His words? Oh, word. Dude, Aizawa-sensei is spitting straight facts. No shit. Listen. Pay attention. He's talking about, wait, when the hell did we move from discussing hero costumes to talking about particle physics? Oh god, I'm so screwed. Sorry, Mom, but I'm gonna be expelled for having the attention span of a rodent. Oh, but Niza has like, big brain. And he's a rodent. Fuck, I'm dumber than a rat. It didn't help that Denki was in the same school building as his soulmate. He couldn't help but search faces whenever he walked the hallways. Somebody here was his soulmate, and that made his heart jump in his chest and his stomach swirl in eager anticipation. He kept accidentally shocking the people who bumped into him, but he couldn't stop because he was so excited. He couldn't help but think about what the voice behind the lavender words sounded like. How Denki's face would fit in the other's hands. How Denki would have to stand on his tiptoes to kiss him properly. Denki's excitement lessened after the first day, but only marginally. He had to focus on school and making connections with his classmates and on the act of focusing itself. Besides, they hadn't discussed meeting each other yet, and Denki didn't want to push his soulmate into something he may not have been ready for. Denki was mostly relieved that he hadn't seen any non-accidental bruises on his body since discussing the situation with his soulmate. Things were good for SH2. They talked about how his classmates weren't scared of him, how they actually talked to him and wanted to know him better. He laughed at his soulmate's apparent inability to converse with other people in any way other than awkwardly. It was cute. Denki wanted to see him. But he was a patient man, so he did his best to be there for his soulmate when they were ready. Maybe that would be soon, and maybe it wouldn't be, but Denki was fine either way because he knew they'd have their whole lives to spend together as soon as they did. It was the third day of classes. Hitoshi was here, enrolled in UA and doing his best to train outside of school too. He was on his way to becoming a hero and, despite every doubt in Hitoshi's mind, things really were getting better. At least, they seemed to be until late morning on this particular day. It wasn't long into class before his teacher strolled over to Hitoshi's desk and asked in a quiet voice, "Shinsou, may I talk to you outside for a moment?" Hitoshi felt a chill trickle down his back. It wasn't like his fosters had done anything recently, he made sure of it. There weren't any obvious bruises other than ones he got from parkour practice. Was he getting kicked out or something? Maybe the admin had thought about how villainous his quirk actually appeared and decided to get rid of him before anything could happen. He'd done his best to follow all the school rules and listen to his teachers, but maybe they found some other excuse to expel him. But god damn it if it didn't hurt to lose it all after everything he had worked so hard to gain. He nodded stiffly, rising from his seat. They walked out of the classroom, catching only a few curious glances on their way out. As soon as the door was closed, his teacher put a hand on his shoulder and in a gentle but firm voice asked, "Are you all right?" "What?" Hitoshi said, bemused. That wasn't at all what he was expecting. He may have been the highest rank in all of general studies, but he still expected a gentle, heartbreaking letdown of expulsion. Definitely not this. Not unwarranted concern. His teacher blinked at him. "Your nose is bleeding and you look a little roughed up. Is somebody?" "You know we have a strict no bullying policy, Hige." "Oh, no, it's nothing like that, sensei." Hitoshi scratched the back of his neck, a nervous habit. He was relieved though. "It's my soul bond. Shared skin." He watched as his teacher's face turned from concern to surprise. "Oh wow. Those are pretty rare." Hitoshi just nodded. He didn't really know what else to say or how to pick up the conversation. "Well, I'm glad you're all right," his teacher said with a smile, standing up straight. "I just hope that soulmate of yours is okay. If you ever need anything, even if it's just stepping out of class for a moment, don't hesitate to ask me. I won't bite." Hitoshi bowed slightly, muttering out a quick but sincere thanks. With that, Hitoshi and his teacher walked back into the room where students were still diligently working on a writing assignment. Hitoshi had a hard time focusing in class after that. There was a nagging feeling that something was wrong. He knew the other boy was in the heroics course, but he didn't know which class, nor did he know what their schedule was like. He assumed they'd be training physically, but not to what extent. This should probably be expected, but Hitoshi couldn't stop the nagging doubtful feeling. He did his best to ignore it until the phone on his teacher's desk rang. His teacher picked it up, listened intently with a grim expression, and then stood up in front of the class. "Listen up, class. I'm needed somewhere else promptly. Keep working on your assignments and do not leave until I or another staff member tells you to do so. Class Republic, you're in charge. I'm trusting you all to follow these orders like your life depends on it." His teacher shot a final glance around the room before briskly walking out. From the hall, Hitoshi and the rest of his stunned, silent class could hear the teacher's footsteps turn to running strides. Hitoshi quickly pulled out his lavender marker, pulling up his sleeve. "There's something wrong. My teacher just left our class." "You're bleeding? Please tell me you're safe." Hitoshi waited for a reply. None came. "Please, Kiddy, just give me a sign that you're okay. Anything." The only thing Hitoshi could do was stare at the previous golden yellow words from this morning. "Are you the sun? 'Cause you're hot. Winky face. And you light up my life." And my world revolves around you. Around him, Hitoshi's classmates murmured among themselves while the class representative did her best to cajole them into quiet. Hitoshi was hardly paying attention. He could only stare at the empty space not being filled with reassuring golden glitter. It took a while, much too long in Hitoshi's opinion, but soon enough their teacher returned, releasing them to the cafeteria for lunch. There was a nervous hum in the air and people were speaking softly. There was no rancorous laughter like there usually was. No yelling at one another from across the building. Hitoshi ate on the stairs alone, like he usually did. Over the intercom, a voice told the students lunch was being extended due to a staff meeting. Hitoshi wasn't sure he liked the implications of what was going on. Hey, sorry. I'm alive and okay. Thankful. Holy shit, KD. What the hell happened? Hitoshi had almost finished his food when he saw the words glinting at him as he raised a hand to brush his hair behind his ear. Dude, it was crazy. I don't even remember half of it because of my quirk's backlash after taking down like 24 creepy. Shit. I don't know if I'm supposed to tell anyone. Police biz, you know? Hitoshi watched carefully. His soulmate began writing again. Boot, you are my soulmate. And I know you wouldn't break a promise to little ol' me. I'll tell you as long as you promise not to say anything to anybody else. I swear. I never. The pit in Hitoshi's stomach only continued to grow. Hitoshi read the steadily increasing words that slowly filled up his arm. He listened as KD ranted and drew shitty cartoon versions of the events. He knew the other boy was trying to make it sound less terrifying than it actually was, but Hitoshi was aware of how shaken his soulmate must have been. That's a lot. He wrote once the story finished. I'm sorry that happened to you guys. I'm glad you're okay. Fuck me too, man. That handsy guy was giving me weird vibes and I didn't end up anywhere near that dude. You're giving me weird vibes. Shut. Never. Hitoshi paused. That golden doodle on his arm looked suspiciously like an underground hero, but KD said it was actually of his teacher. It couldn't be. Also, what's your teacher's name? Hitoshi watched as a golden circle was placed around the words Aizawa-sensei from the previous story. Hitoshi glared. He put his pen down again, writing hero caret between the last two words of his question. I dunno. It's something like erasure something? That's his quirk anyway. Why didn't you tell me Eraserhead was your teacher? I'm sorry? How was I supposed to know that was important, relevant information to you? Bruh? Never mind, it's fine. I'm just. You're just whoa? You good, SH? I'm good. I just sorta used to idolize the guy when I was a kid. And he. Actually, never mind. I just remembered I should be asking you that question. You're the one who got attacked by love today. P.S. SSH villain Schmillen. The class is okay for the most part. We're all pretty worried about Aizawa. I mean, the dude's only known us for 3 days and he's all sacrificing his life for us and shit. I can see why you liked him so much. Dude's a real hero. Hitoshi thought back to the night Eraserhead spoke with him outside his window. He'd given his personal number to some random kid with delusions of becoming a hero with a quirk society deemed villainous. He really is. Is anyone gonna tell me why the fuck they decided to have the sports festival this year? Don't get me wrong. I'm not entirely mad at it, but we also were attacked by villains. Less than a week ago. Their excuse is public trust and student morale. Who knows their real reasons? Either way, I'm probably the only student actually looking forward to it. Denki blanched at the lavender comment. What? Why? It's part of my plan. An integral part. You mean your world domination mwahaha plan or your defeat class 1A and become the supreme hero plan? The second one. Yes. Why'd you phrase it like that? Denki let out a laugh around a mouthful of cereal, getting a glare out of Peeps from the other side of their kitchen table. The house felt weirdly empty now that Toro had gone to college on a full-ride scholarship to one of the top medical schools in Tokyo. Since their mom had work almost all the time, it was mostly just Denki and Peeps in the house. So, you're planning to kick our butts today, huh? Denki wrote, pointedly ignoring the question. Good luck. You're gonna need it. Some of my classmates are intense. Denki shuddered, thinking about Bakugo having the ability to completely let loose at the sports festival. Peeps shot him another look, munching on toast, scrolling through something listlessly on her phone. Don't worry about me, kitty. You're the one who's gonna need that luck. Not me. Smiley face. Why did you make your smiley face so sinister? Sad face. Smiley face. Uneasy face. Denki finished his cereal by slurping the milk loudly. He was purposefully trying to get Peep's eyebrow to twitch in irritation like it always did when she wanted to murder somebody. Her gaze was that of daggers as she stared him down over her own breakfast. Her sharp eyeliner really sold the murderous intent behind her golden eyes. He sent her a beaming smile as he got up to rinse his bowl and spoon. She rolled her eyes at him, looking back to her phone. Slipping his backpack and shoes on, Denki was just about ready to leave. I'm leaving, see ya later, emo dickut. Fuck you too, walking power outage. Don't fuck up the tournament. I'll be watching. Peeps replies from their shared room, voice partially muffled due to the walls separating them. Thank you. Denki beamed in the general direction of their room. That was Peep's way of saying good luck, I believe in you. He opened the door and began his short trek to school. They were supposed to get there early and Denki did not appreciate the lack of time for beauty sleep. Although, compared to his soulmate, this was nothing. The other boy had to get up 3 hours before their requested time because he had to catch a train that was inconveniently late every time you needed to be early and would be especially packed due to the festival. Before he knew it, the sports festival was starting and Denki was in his element. It was times like these, where everything was happening at once and there was always something new to focus on, that Denki flourished. His ADHD made it easy for his mind to function under such chaotic pressure, and he found himself actually having fun. Of course, it was his own overeagerness and lack of future insight that cost Denki his spot in the top, but he was proud of how far he made it. Of course, he would have liked to go farther, but considering he was in the top battle tournaments, he was proud enough. Not to mention the blatant distraction that was Shinsou Hitoshi. Denki sat in the stands, sitting next to his main man, Shiro Hanta, when he saw who Midoriya was put up against. He gaped down at the tall boy with indigo hair and stunning facial structure. Next to him, Shiro raised an eyebrow in amused curiosity. Do you remember that guy I told you about? Denki asked him, keeping his eyes fixed on the battlefield. Which one? You've got, like, 5 new ones each week? Shiro sent him a knowing smirk and Denki elbowed him in the side. Rude, he said without any real malice. Denki would be lying if he denied ever having thought about Shiro possibly being his soulmate. The SH fit the shoe, and the two seemed to get along well. Except, it turned out that the walking tape dispenser had a completely different kind of soul bond to Denki. Alas, Denki's soulmate was once again reduced purely to faceless lavender words. I meant the one from the entrance exam. Shiro's dark eyes held recognition as a shit-eating grin found a place on his features. That's the guy you were thirsting over? Shut up, man. He's hot. Many heads turned and faced Denki's dignified yell. He quickly shrunk down in his seat, crossing his arms over his chest. His cheeks burned as he realized he was much louder than he meant to be. At his side, Shiro was losing his shit, cackling at Denki's embarrassment. Behind him, he could feel Ajuru's amused gaze and heard Mineta mutter, gross, under his breath. I mean, I guess I can see it. Shiro contemplated once his laughter died down, tapping his chin with his finger. In a weird, sleep-deprived, on the verge of death kind of way. He turned to face Denki, spreading his hands in a surprise kind of gesture. Like an e-boy. Denki put on the most disgusted face he could muster, and slowly turned to Shiro. He opened his mouth to reveal how utterly insulted he felt, when Ajuru stood up behind them. No, Midoriya, he said, concern dripping into his voice. I told him not to say anything. Just like that, Denki was hyper-focused on the fight, or lack thereof, below them. Midoriya was just standing there, eyes wide and blank. Denki narrowed his eyes, squinting in confusion at what was happening. Midoriya turned around, walking towards the edge of the arena. Holy shit, Denki said. Beside him, Shiro let out a low whistle. That's a hell of a quirk. Shiro quipped. Ajuru, what did you mean before? Denki asked, voice strangely serious. HM? Just that, That guy's quirk is activated by replying to him. I think it's some kind of mind control quirk. I tried to warn Midoriya, but he still got him. Oh, Denki said quietly. After a moment, he continued, did you catch his name? He felt Shiro's questioning stare from beside him, but didn't acknowledge it. He couldn't take his eyes off the beautiful indigo boy. Suddenly, a small blast near Midoriya brought the crowd to the edge of their seats. He was just about to cross the threshold, out of legal territory, but then he was turning around, charging the taller boy who looked shocked. In a moment, they were fighting, one pushing the other towards the out-of-bounds area. The unnamed boy was shouting something at Midoriya, desperately trying to get him to respond. He looked pained. It was over in seconds, Midoriya flipping the lanky boy over his shoulder. He landed hard on the ground, his back taking the brunt of the impact. Denki winced. Behind him, Ajiru sighed in relief. Next to him, Shiro said, man, that was close. Denki stared at the tall boy, saying nothing as the booming voice of Present Mike announced the fight's outcome. There you have it, folks. In a surprising turn of events, Midoriya Izuku is victorious. What a great fight put up by both parties. Please, give a round of applause to our other brilliant opponent, Shinsou Hitoshi. Shinsou Hitoshi. Lavender words and indigo hair. An intimidating psychological quirk. Taller than himself by 3.75 inches. Lanky. Sarcastic. Awkward. That was his soulmate. It had to be. They'd even met before and Denki hadn't thought twice about it. For some reason he felt it in his gut. He knew it to be true. Shinsou Hitoshi was his soulmate. What the fuck was he supposed to do now? Denki was well aware that he was getting ahead of himself. There was a good chance that every connection made between SH and Shinsou Hitoshi was just a simple convenience. Denki knew his eagerness and impulsivity tended to have him believe in false rhetoric, especially when that rhetoric was around a pretty boy being his soulmate. He had already made the mistake of assuming Shiro was a possibility, so maybe this was another mistake. Denki needed somebody else's less bias towards pretty boy's point of view. So, the next day during lunch, he confided in his friends that he was in a bit of a predicament. Honestly, Kaminari, Mina said around Shiro's head. He was sitting between them on their lunch bench. When aren't you in some kind of predicament? Shiro snickered behind his long fingers, and Denki had to resist elbowing him into his rice. These people had no respect for the disaster that was Kaminari Denki. Like, Denki didn't either, but his friends should have at least a little. They willingly hang out with him. I'll have you know that I was a controversy-free man before coming to this cursed school. Sure. Mina rolled her dark eyes at him with a Cheshire cat smile. What's going on, man? Thank the fates for Kirishima. He was the only wholesome person in their friend group, and, while he usually made fun of him for it, Denki was grateful the redhead had found a place in their small collection of gremlins. So, Denki looked around their table. Across from him sat Bakugo, his back leaning aggressively into Kirishima's side, frown ever present. Kirishima looked happy and slightly concerned, eating his meat-covered plate. Across from the redhead was their token alien queen, who was blinking at Denki with her cool-looking, black eyes. Her pink hair curled around her cheeks and slightly brushed Shiro's longish black hair. Shiro narrowed his eyes ever so slightly at Denki, as if he knew something was up. I think I know who my soulmate is, but I'm not completely sure, and I need an unbiased party, you guys, to tell me if everything's just one huge convenience or if it's at all credible, because I really don't want to get my hopes up for nothing or embarrass myself again like I did with Shiro that one time. Denki let out in one breath. A quiet moment passed where everybody took in the information before their well-practiced chaos ensued. Mina stood up, slamming her hands down on the table, right after Shiro and Kirishima instinctively moved their trays away from her destructive gesture. She let out a terrifyingly high noise of excitement, saying, "Oh my god, that's so exciting. Who is it? That one time with Shiro?" Kirishima repeated slowly, raising an eyebrow at the two. His smile had turned smaller and more devious. "Why'd you bring it up, dude?" Shiro had turned to Denki with a red face and scrunched eyebrows. Denki quickly waved his hands in front of himself saying, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, It just kinda slipped out. I was nervous. Jesus Christ, shut up. Bakugu's irritated shout reeled their attention back in. Looking at the abrasive blonde, Denki noticed he was sitting up straighter than before, giving Denki his attention. Kirishima watched Bakugu with wide eyes, doing his best to keep a neutral expression, but Denki noticed hints of wary curiosity. What's your fucking evidence? Bakugu grumbled, glaring at something in the distance. His side was still pressed against Kirishima's, but he was no longer leaning his full weight into him. Wait, you're helping? Denki blinked at him. Fuck you, dunce face. He yelled, but he went back to mumbling and crossing his arms after Kirishima said something low in his ear. Obviously you're all idiots, and I don't want you going and harassing some extra saying that I thought it was a good idea. Baku, you do care. Denki leaned in, hands under his chin, and fluttered his eyelashes at the angry boy. He immediately moved as far back in his seat as possible as Bakugu wrenched out a hand to strangle him with. I'll kill you, he shouted over Shiro's snickers. It does make sense though, Denki continued as if nothing out of the ordinary were happening. Out of the 5 of us, there's collectively only 4 brain cells and Bakugu has them all. The 3 others solemnly nodded their heads in solidarity, knowing that Denki spoke the truth. Bakugu teased but didn't deny it. Denki told them all his evidence. About the matching initials, the similar quirks, the lavender marker and lavender hair, the plan his soulmate had to get into the heroics course, the one time they met previously at the entrance exam and how adorably awkward he was, their exact height difference. Everything. The only thing he didn't talk about was the evident abuse his soulmate suffered. It wasn't relevant nor any of his business to share. Mina hummed as he finished. Did you write to him about any of this? Nope. Denki said, smiling. For pairs of eyes turned to give him "Are you fucking kidding me" look. No, wait, listen. Denki struggled to explain himself. It's just, what if I'm wrong? I wouldn't want to tell my soulmate about a cute guy that I think is him, only to be wrong and hurt his feelings and mess up everything. It was true. Denki didn't want to lose the normalcy his soulmate brought to his life. They talked in the mornings and the evenings, and during the afternoon when his soulmate had a break from training with his new, unspecified mentor. It had taken a long time for the lavender words to open up to Denki, and he didn't want to lose that. I don't think you could mess up everything, Kaminari, Kirishima told him with a steady smile. I don't think it's even possible for a soul bond like that. Kirishima had a wistful, almost sad look in his face, and Denki noticed Bakugu's eyes studying him carefully. Then again, Shiro said next to him, dryly. He is Kaminari. Denki flipped off the walking tape dispenser, but turned to look at Bakugu as he angrily mumbled. I guess it's not that much of a stretch. Bakugu squinted his eyes as Denki and Mina began to cheer. But the cheering abruptly ended, replaced by a quiet awe. Do you even know if this guy has the same kind of soul bond? Like, definitively? No. Denki said, looking down at his lap. Bakugu had a point. A really good point. A kind of heartbreaking point. Curse Denki's big heart and inability to not fall in love with pretty, mysterious strangers. Oh, I know, Mina said, standing up again with a sinister grin. We gotta watch him to make sure he does. Denki stood up too, grinning just as manically at her. It was the perfect plan. They needed more information in order to be sure that Shinsou was who they thought he was, and Denki couldn't make a complete fool out of himself from 20 feet away. It made perfect sense. Across the table, Kirishima looked from one malintended grin to the other. Are you guys seriously suggesting spying on this dude? Funny. He sounded concerned. Spy buddies? Denki shouted, raising his hands to clasp them with Mina's over Shiro's head. Spy buddies? Mina cheered with him. Jesus, shut up. Bakugu growled. Yeah, I mean for spies, Shiro said, a judgmental lilt in his voice. You guys sure are subtle. Kirishima let out a loud laugh, and Denki quickly took his hands back from Mina's, glancing around their table suspiciously. He put one hand over his mouth and did his best impression of walkie-talkie static. Codename Girl in Red. Come in. Mina put on a serious face and clamped a pink hand over her mouth. They both slowly sunk down into their seats, sending overly dramatic, suspicious glances at every student or staff member who walked by. Girl in red present. This is codename Disaster by, I presume? Over. Your presumption is correct. Over. You guys are idiots? Shiro said, having to sit between the two's antics. He slowly shoved his rice around on his plate, shaking his head like a disappointed mother over her misbehaving children at a diner. Sorry, didn't quite catch that DB. There was a moron jamming the signal. Can you repeat? Over. Mina's eyes wrinkled as she smiled at Denki, edging closer to Shiro. Denki scooched closer towards the black-haired teen as well. You said something about a moron? My signal is being jammed by an idiot over here. Maybe if I get closer, it'll vanish. Over. I can't win, Shiro said, pushing his tray out of the way as he face-planted into the table in order to avoid his face being smushed between Mina and Denki. Denki patted the despondent boy's back, laughter forcing its way out of his lungs. Mina laughed with him, and Kirishima had a big, dopey smile on his face. Bakugo rolled his eyes, but Denki didn't miss the way he leaned into Kirishima's side nonchalantly. Nor did he miss the way Kirishima's smile got brighter and his eyes got softer at the gesture. Something was going on there, Denki decided. It wasn't any of his business, but he may, possibly, definitely have to question Kirishima about it later. For spy purposes, of course. Denki was lucky. He knew he was lucky to have friends like this. To have people who really cared for him and joked with him and tried their best to love the parts of him that Denki couldn't bring himself to. It was nice to have people he could confide in and who would support him. He didn't always have people like this. Most people from junior high only talked to him because of his quirk, and left him for dead as soon as he started showing his true, overly excitable nature. He's never had friends like these before, but he thinks they're the best friends he's ever had. Hitoshi was being followed. The two culprits weren't even trying to be subtle. Hitoshi thought that if they really wanted to stalk him, they could at least give their best effort not to be spotted. It would have been good practice for hero work then. Maybe. He was grateful that they didn't follow him after school hours though. That would have been weird. Or weirder than the current level of weird they created. He was on a break from training with Aizawa. He was getting better, steadily so. With his lunches and breakfasts being served by his school, he was able to gain some weight and some muscle. Having extra energy felt invigorating. Feeling strong felt good. Aizawa told him he was pretty surprised at how fast he was improving as well. It was weird being praised by an adult for something other than having done a favor for them. Weird but good. He could get used to this, and that thought scared Hitoshi. This wasn't his normal. This was a dream and he was working hard at it, but he couldn't get used to it. He couldn't rely on this, because as soon as he did, he knew it would fall apart. Like every other thing Hitoshi had ever relied on. Aizawa was making it really hard not to though. He was kind to Hitoshi. He never pushed him past his limits. He was gentle with the younger boy when sparring, careful not to hurt him. He never appeared angry or upset if Hitoshi couldn't do something on the first try. Or the second. Or the third. Forever. Part of it was unnerving. Part of it was comforting. Hitoshi wasn't sure which feeling to trust. He rolled up his sleeve, looking at golden glitter pen scribbles from his soulmate. He saw the usual, the day's pickup line, "Are you from Tennessee? 'Cause you're the only 10 I see." Which what? They were in Japan. Hitoshi didn't even know what a Tennessee was. A few quips about his day, a few questions about Hitoshi's. It was nice to look forward to. Except for one comment, referring to a grip-like bruise Hitoshi hadn't been able to cover up with makeup on his upper arm. He had hidden it easily with his sleeve, but his soulmate was bound to notice it. "Are you okay? Is it happening again? I think, maybe you should tell someone what's going on." It had happened the night of the sports festival. His fosters had waited up for him, told him he wasted his time by trying, that he didn't win the thing and he'd never be a real hero. Hitoshi didn't say anything, even when his foster father had gripped his arm tightly and insulted his life's only desire. It didn't matter though. His words were minuscule compared to the offer Eraserhead gave him a few hours prior. He asked Hitoshi to call him Aizawa or Sensei, and told the boy he would personally train him. Hitoshi would need to work hard, especially if he wanted to move classes this year, but if he was up to it, the offer stood. Of course Hitoshi accepted. There was no other option. Not for him. Hitoshi sat in a grass field, long legs spread out in front of him, bag within arm's reach. Aizawa laid a few feet away, taking a nap. He took out his lavender pen and did his best to respond to everything his soulmate wrote. He got stuck on that last line of questioning though. "I'm fine. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." It was all he could think to write. He couldn't really tell anyone what was happening in his foster home. There was nobody to take him in. Years ago, KD and his mom had actually looked into becoming fosters for him. It didn't work out, unfortunately. Not only would the process have taken months to get through the system, but they were a big family being supported by a singular income. They couldn't afford another kid, even with the monthly check Hitoshi came with. He could have lied to his soulmate, said, "I'll think about it." But he wouldn't. He couldn't. There was maybe one person who would house him for a night or two. But he would never actually let Hitoshi stay with him. Hitoshi's purple eyes glanced over to the sleeping man in question. Apparently, Hitoshi's anxious tapping of his pen was loud enough to wake Aizawa. He didn't even notice the older man watching him until his eyes slid over to where his mentor should have been sleeping. When he saw Aizawa sitting up, looking at him blankly, Hitoshi's eyes went wide. His pen tapping stopped. He didn't blink and he couldn't look away, the eye contact holding him there. Aizawa glanced down to Hitoshi's left forearm where the writing was. Then, flicked to the purple marker in his right hand. Finally, he met Hitoshi's eyes again. His gaze was always intimidating, but Hitoshi knew it wasn't purposeful. "Sorry," Hitoshi said dumbly. "Soulmate stuff?" He scratched the back of his head and pulled down his left sleeve, covering the mix of gold glitter and matte lavender. Aizawa seemed to appraise him for a moment, before one side of his mouth quirked up. "I see." He said it softly, and it made Hitoshi curious. He wanted to ask Aizawa about his soulmate, because the teacher was never soft around anyone except the people he cared about. Hitoshi had seen it before when he spoke about his stupid, reckless students, or about present Mick's overly loud existence, and occasionally when he talked with Hitoshi. Maybe asking Aizawa about this would help Hitoshi figure out all this soulmate stuff himself. He was almost completely sure he knew who it was, but he was still apprehensive. About everything. Meeting him meant change, and Hitoshi really liked the way things were now. Call him a coward, but Hitoshi was afraid to lose the one person he couldn't live without. "You know, if you have questions, you can ask them." Aizawa had easily seen through Hitoshi's internal struggle. God damn it, there was no getting past this man, was there? "If I'm uncomfortable with answering, I won't." Hitoshi nodded once, thinking of what question to ask. He had so many. "Do you have a soulmate?" He decided to start without assumptions. "A solid base." "Yes." Aizawa's reply was instant and unsurprising. "What kind of soul bond do you have?" A cool breeze billowed through the grass and rustled Hitoshi's hair. Aizawa's expression turned into one Hitoshi learned was amusement. "When we met, we had shared thoughts for a week." He grinned dryly. "At the time, it felt like the end of the world. I thought I was gonna kill Hizashi before it ended, but we turned out okay." Hitoshi turned the statement around in his mind for a minute. Hizashi. That name sounded familiar, and Hitoshi was sure Aizawa had mentioned it before, but he couldn't place it with a face. "Were you?" Hitoshi searched for the right words. He didn't want to say scared, but maybe. Apprehensive at all? About what? Having a soulmate? Having to share my thoughts? It being Hizashi? Aizawa looked at him with a raised brow, but continued when Hitoshi looked overwhelmed. "To tell you the truth, it was all of it. I grew up thinking I didn't have one. It was lonely, especially with the kind of home I grew up in. But finding Hizashi was probably the best thing that's ever happened to me." He paused, looking Hitoshi in the eye. "Mostly I was scared. The entire situation was something I had no experience with, and I felt out of my element. Sharing anything personal like my thoughts was terrifying. And Hizashi seemed so different from myself at first glance, I thought it could never work." "But you're happy now?" "Yeah. I'm the most happy I've ever been." At first glance, we probably seem like very different people. While that's true, we are also one in the same. cut from the same cloth. We complete each other. Aizawa's eyes were soft, looking at the grass between them. He looked back up at Hitoshi. Is there a reason you're asking, Shinsou? Of course there was, and of course Aizawa had figured it out. Shinsou looked down at his forearm, placing his right hand over it in an effort to somewhat comfort himself. We haven't met yet? He paused, trying to hold back his doubts from Aizawa. And it's like I know him and he knows me, but what if we meet and he realizes that I'm not? That he doesn't? What if he realizes that he doesn't want me? Nobody else ever has. Shinsou, Aizawa starts, and Hitoshi raises his gaze to the dark-haired man. When you meet, things will change. They will be different, but it'll be a good different. A difference you didn't know you needed until it's there. Your soulmate is the person best suited to be with you throughout your life. I don't think he would turn that down so easily. He would be lucky to have you. You're a good kid, Shinsou. Shinsou blinked at him once, then bowed his head slightly. A small smile found a way to his face, and Shinsou believed him. Aizawa had never lied to him before, he'd never done anything remotely untrustworthy, so Shinsou allowed himself, just this once, to believe the words he had always yearned to. Thank you, sensei. Don't mention it. Hitoshi looked up as he heard sounds of movement from across the patchy grass between them. Break's over. Let's go. Yes, sir. Hitoshi scrambled to get up, shoving his purple marker and water bottle back into his bag. A feeling of reassurance settled into his bones. He thought, when things did change, maybe they would be for the better. Hitoshi had always wondered if his soulmate was as bright as his golden glitter pen. He thinks he's ready to find out. Denki was about to head off on a solo mission at lunch. His partner in crime, Girl in Red, had to retake a test for English, and the rest of his lunch buddies were too busy to join him. Bakugo was tutoring Kirishima for the test they had in Aizawa's class tomorrow, and Siro was finishing up some project in the library. Denki had nearly had a heart attack when he forgot about it, but then realized he did it all the night it was assigned because he got bored and fidgety when he couldn't sleep, and needed an excuse to listen to Present Mix radio show when the undiscovered bands were playing at 2 a.m. It had been about 2 weeks since he and Mina started their stalking spying plan, and so far they hadn't seen Shinsou draw on his skin at all. However, that didn't necessarily prove anything, because SH never really wrote to him at lunch either. If only there was some way to definitively know without having to lurk behind corners and walls. Why don't you just ask him? Kirishima supplied as Denki was getting ready to leave the classroom, shoving notebooks and loose papers into his backpack. He'd swear to organize them later, but he knew that was a lie and he stood by it. Kirishima and Bakugo were sharing a desk, getting out notes to review. There were a couple stragglers left in Aizawa's room, but none of them were too loud to study around. Yeah? Jairu said, making her way past the three. He probably thinks you're a creep, following him around like that? What? No. Denki gave her an insulted look, putting a pair of binoculars around his neck. Jar shot him a look, judgmental eyes flickering from his binoculars to his face, before turning around at the door and leaving, hand intertwined with Momo's. Denki sulked towards Kirishima and Bakugo. Do I really look creepy? They answered at the same time. You look annoying. Bakugo growled. Maybe lose the binoculars. Kirishima said gently. Denki groaned, taking off the binoculars and shoving them into his backpack. He slung the bag over his shoulder dejectedly and told the two he was gonna go get lunch, then think about his actions. He was about 3/4 of the way to the cafeteria when Denki reached into his pocket for his phone. He was getting bored with staring out of the big glass windows and pondering how many ghosts could haunt the Great Wall of China at once, and instead wanted to scroll through some Instagram meme pages while he walked. It wasn't there. Finding all of his pockets empty, Denki stopped and rummaged through his backpack. It wasn't there either. He must have left it in the classroom. He debated waiting in the lunch line without it, but knew he would get way too antsy without something to focus on, and pondering the Great Wall's death count was getting a little old, so he turned around and walked quickly back to the classroom, feeling a little irritated at himself. Denki paused with his hand on the door handle when he arrived to hear Mineta's loud voice yelling about something. He pressed his ear to the door, curious as he heard other classmates' voices as well. It sounded like a legitimate argument was happening, and Denki wasn't necessarily eavesdropping if they were yelling, right? What are you talking about, man? Kirishima's muffled voice had an uncharacteristically confused and slightly insulted tone to it. Yeah, Tsuyu's voice called out matter-of-factly. You didn't seem to have a problem with any of the girls' relationships. Oh yeah, that's because it's hot. Mineta's voice was as nasally as ever, and Denki got a bad feeling about all this. He heard a collective, frustrated groan from his other peers. Two dudes being soulmates is just weird. It sounded as if Mineta shuddered at the word. Denki felt something constricting wind in his chest, holding back his breath. It's not natural. Mineta's words conjured a sharp pang of dread in his chest. Hagakure's voice suddenly shouted from somewhere close to the door, startling Denki into breathing again. That's not true. If you actually picked up a textbook every once in a while, you'd know that they've always existed. It was only after society developed that they had to go into hiding because people in power decided there was no way to force them into quirk marriages. They couldn't be used, so they had to lay low or be executed. She huffed and said, "You don't know what you're talking about, so just drop it, Mineta." But Kaminari seemed like such a cool guy. A deep, resigned cold seeped into Denki at the words. So this was about him. I never thought he could do something so disgusting. He's a fucking effing. It was at that moment, Denki realized he did not want to hear anymore. It kinda stung that someone in his class, someone that he trusted, had said something like that about him. He wasn't surprised it was Mineta though. Denki should have known better than to give someone like him the benefit of the doubt. Denki turned the handle and pushed open the door. He didn't stop when he felt the whole room freeze to stare at him. He kept his gaze downward and tried to make himself small, but not abnormally so. He walked over to his desk, only glancing up at Kirishima and Bakugo. It was weird. The only way he could describe the way that Kirishima looked was hurt. Not even on Denki's behalf, although he was sure that was part of it. It looked like the words had affected him personally, like they had dug deep and pinched a nerve. Denki made a mental note to talk to him about it later. Bakugo, however, looked more angry than Denki had ever seen him. This wasn't his loud, rancorous, exploding fury, it was different. It was quiet and cold, but it was absolutely seething. He was a kettle whose whistle was piercing, but no one had taken it off the burner yet. Bakugo was glaring Mineta down with a murderous gaze, standing up at his desk, but he wasn't moving. Denki thinks, if it wasn't for Kirishima's hand holding the fabric of his shirt, he would have probably injured Mineta by now. Forgot my phone, Denki said in a forced, light-hearted tone. He grabbed it from his desk, lifting it up for everyone to see, before practically running out the door. On his way out, Hagakure called out, "Wait, Kaminari." But it was too late. He had heard enough and he didn't need his classmates' pity. He knew he had their support, but this was just embarrassing. Humiliated, Denki ran through the hallways, finding a secluded stairway far from class and sat down. He wasn't hungry anymore. Right now, he wanted to get away from it all, so he pulled out his phone with the intention of texting his eldest sister. She was always a good distraction, talking about her college shenanigans and her rude RA. She would be a nice comfort right now. Except, of course, his phone was dead. He had used it during class too much, and oh, that's why it was on his desk. Shit. The curse left a bitter taste in his mouth. The slouching blonde pulled out a charging cable from his backpack, stuck one end in his phone, and another in his mouth, and let it slowly charge. He let out a sigh. He hoped Kirishima was okay. He looked worse off than Denki had felt, and he had a sneaking suspicion that Kirishima was having some kind of crisis. Denki didn't want to assume anything, but the redhead had some pretty ingrained ideas of manliness, so maybe his parents were traditional people. Denki shuddered at the thought of his own family being anything less than accepting. He would be freaked out too. Denki leaned his head against the wall next to the stairs. His feet rested on the next step beneath him, while he sat on the top step. There was too much to think about right now. He was getting overwhelmed, and he wished his brain could turn off for a second, flip the switch for autopilot, and go back to thinking of simpler things, like how aliens would measure distance of travel in outer space, 'cause light years were far too human of a concept. Denki closed his eyes, let the cold of the wall seep into his skin, and let himself drift off until the bell rang. The silence of the moment was just what he needed. Hitoshi was surprised to see somebody dozing off in his regular lunch spot. Even more surprised to find that person being Kaminari Denki, his prime soulmate suspect, with a charger cable hanging out of his mouth. He looked kinda cute, snoozing like that. Hitoshi had never seen him look quite so peaceful before. Not that Hitoshi had seen much of him, but he noticed the other boy was always moving. Now, he was still and silent. Hitoshi debated going somewhere else to eat his lunch and leave the blonde be, but Aizawa's words rang in his head. Things will be different, but a good different. A difference you won't know you needed. As quietly as he could, Hitoshi set down his tray and sat at the opposite end of the top step. He took out his phone. Having been able to get a new one with the extra emergency food money he no longer needed to save. He looked at a Discord server for owners and fans of Munchkin cats, and slowly ate his food. Hitoshi had to relearn how to not immediately engulf all the food on his plate since he started at UA. When he was in different foster homes, he had many reasons to eat as quickly as he could. Sometimes, he really was just that hungry, but most of the time dinner was eaten at a table with other foster kids and parents. If Hitoshi took too long, kids would scavenge off whatever morsels were left in his plate, or the adults would take it from him before he was finished. He didn't have to worry as much now, knowing that he would be at this school for the next 3 years, so he could depend on at least 2 full meals a day. So, Hitoshi had relearned to pace himself. It was halfway through the lunch hour when Hitoshi laughed through his nose at a video of a cat freaking out over a cucumber and accidentally destroying the owner's kitchen. It must have been audible enough for Kaminari to hear, because the blonde boy raised a groggy, sleep-filled head off the wall and turned towards him. "Hey," Hitoshi said, watching with amusement as the blonde boy across from him blinked blearily, squinting his eyes at Hitoshi. "Am I dreaming?" He rubbed one of his sleep-addled eyes with his knuckles. The charging cable fell from his mouth without much reaction. One side of Hitoshi's lips curled upward. Hitoshi had never gotten a chance to really see Kaminari's eyes before. They were a beautiful, warm yellow gold, like an early morning sunrise, and Hitoshi was afraid he might get lost in them. "Nope," he informed Kaminari, "but you were sleeping in my lunch spot." Shit. Kaminari seemed to wake up more, literally jolting with a shiver of electricity that began at the crown of his head and moved downwards. "Sorry. It's fine." Hitoshi glanced back down to his phone for a moment, then moved his sharp gaze back to Kaminari. "Have you been following me?" Kaminari blanched. "Why, you noticed?" His face colored tomato red and he waved his hands in front of himself desperately, while Hitoshi deadpanned at him. How did he not know they were being so obvious? It wasn't stalking. Per se, just, gaining information to confirm or deny a potential hypothesis? And what hypothesis would that be? Kaminari looked extremely uncomfortable, but Hitoshi couldn't deny he was having fun teasing him a little. He'd reel it in. "Kidding. You don't have to actually answer that." Kaminari literally sighed in relief. Hitoshi watched the tension ease from his shoulders and soon he was turning back to Hitoshi, a bright smile on his face. "Sorry for spying, he looks a little bashful. I would have asked you but it's just, you're kind of intimidating." Hitoshi froze. Kaminari might as well have said Hitoshi was something to be scared of. The threat. It wasn't like this was anything new. Hitoshi had been seen and treated as one his entire life. So, why did it hurt so much coming from this guy he barely knew? I mean, not in a bad way. Kaminari corrected himself. He must have noticed Hitoshi's gaze harden at the ground between them. When he looked back at Kaminari's expression, there was a dusting of red on his cheeks. Intimidating in a cool way. A cool way? Hitoshi blinked at him. He was confused. Nobody had ever called him cool before, and he had never done anything to make himself seem like it. It was new, different, but not necessarily bad. Kaminari nodded along like it was widely known news, and Hitoshi decided to shrug it off. Cool was better than threatening, he mused. Totally. And if you got your ears pierced? It would look really cool. They'd suit you. Thanks. Hitoshi had thought about it. Mostly after he saw a pair of earrings that made it look like a cat was moving through the earlobe, and Hitoshi needed them. But he never had extra money to spend on a professional piercing and didn't trust himself to do it properly, So he decided to wait until he was out of the system to get them done. There was a moment of silence where neither boy said anything. It was oddly comfortable, and Hitoshi didn't mind letting them sit in it for a while. He glanced at Kaminari from the corner of his eye. The blonde was tying up the phone charger and looking through the notifications on his phone. His face scrunched up unpleasantly as he read something. Hitoshi didn't like it. He faintly wondered if it had anything to do with Kaminari not eating with his friends. "Here," Hitoshi said after a moment, pushing his lunch tray towards the blonde boy. There was still some time left to eat, and Hitoshi had been here pretty much all lunch. He was sure Kaminari hadn't eaten anything. Really? Kaminari's eyes widened hopefully as he shut off his phone and placed it to his right. At Hitoshi's nod, Kaminari's somber expression was replaced by a bright smile. "Thanks. No problem. I don't really like edamame anyways." Kaminari dug into his food, nodding at Hitoshi's comment. When he caught a quiet moment, he glanced suggestively at Hitoshi and said, "You know, when I said I owed you lunch sometime, this was not what I had in mind." Hitoshi laughed through his nose, letting out a sharp exhale of air with a small, upwards quirk of his lips. "Do you mindlessly flirt with everybody? Or just the people that save your life?" "Only the pretty ones," Kaminari said with a wink. Hitoshi knew he shouldn't have been, but he was taken aback by Kaminari's quick wit. When the blonde looked him over, Hitoshi knew he was blushing ever so slightly. He hated it, but he couldn't deny that there were butterflies fluttering up a storm inside his stomach. He felt giddy of all things. Hitoshi had never, not once in his entire life, felt like this before. Sure, he knew the soft, warm feeling he got when riding with his soulmate, but this was different. It was more. "Is that so?" Hitoshi croaked, grabbing for his water bottle inside his backpack. When he looked back at Kaminari, the blonde boy was staring at him, eyes soft and smile bright. His gaze seemed to look at Hitoshi and really see him. It was almost unnerving. "What?" Hitoshi asked, thinking there was something on his face. Maybe his hair looked crazier than usual. He didn't know why the stare made him so fidgety, but it did. Kaminari's smile changed. It turned into something small and hesitant, only a hint of his previous brightness remained, though he tried to project an aura of one. "Oh, nothing, just..." He seemed to turn over around his next words carefully. Do you have a soulmate?" The question took Hitoshi off guard. Yeah." He scratched the back of his neck nervously, cutting his eyes away from the blonde's intense stare. "Oh." It sounded so small. So unlike Kaminari. Hitoshi looked back to find a hopeless look on Kaminari's face. Shit. Hitoshi wasn't clear. He had to make himself clear. "Well, it's you, right?" Kaminari lifted his gaze in an instant. His breath hitched and neither of them moved for a moment. "You're KD?" Kaminari still hadn't said anything and now Hitoshi was afraid he fucked up. Oh God, he fucked up in the worst way possible. Now, things would be awkward between him and Kaminari forever, and when he moved into Class 1A everything would be weird and uncomfortable and they'd hate him before they even got to know him. "Yeah. Oh yeah. That's me," Kaminari finally said, allowing Hitoshi to breathe again. The blonde looked shocked. Hitoshi breathed out quietly, smiling down into his lap. He was, dare he think, happy? He had finally met the boy behind the golden glitter pen, the painted skin on tough nights, the words that made Hitoshi want to live. He knew the boy in front of him inside and out. Now, all he had to do was focus on getting to know the out better. But, cool. It didn't do the moment justice, but it's all Hitoshi could come up with. Usually words were his forte. He knew what to say and to whom, but for some reason Kaminari Denki stole the words from his tongue without even trying. "Cool?" Kaminari yelled, throwing his hands up in exasperation. He was absolutely beaming. "This is incredible." Suddenly, Kaminari had slid himself across the top step, only stopping when he was right next to Hitoshi. There was barely an inch between the two, and Hitoshi calmed a nervous excitement that jumped into his throat. "Why yeah." Kaminari's face was right in front of him, grinning and gazing. They took a moment to simply gaze. From here, Hitoshi could see flecks of burnt honey in his golden eyes, a splash of light freckles on his cheeks, or were those moles? A dimple on one side of his face. "Are your eyes really this purple?" Or do you wear contacts? They're just like that. Kaminari's voice was softer when he was this close to Hitoshi. Somewhere between a whisper and his regular speaking voice. It made Hitoshi shiver. Do you dye the streak in your hair, or is it natural? It's natural. Peeps usually has one just like it, but she's going through a phase right now. Which, you already knew, huh? As they searched, Hitoshi's eyes looked up towards Kaminari's hairline and found a familiar scar. He flinched. It was from the night he had to stitch himself back up. The night he met Eraserhead for the first time. The night his soulmate thought he died. An ugly dread filled Hitoshi as he remembered the years of abuse he wore on his skin. The same marks he inadvertently shared to Kaminari. What's wrong? Kaminari leaned in, tilting his head to the side cutely. He was concerned at the expression Hitoshi hadn't realized he'd been pulling. I'm sorry. He looked away from Kaminari's golden eyes. He understood why he used that glitter pen. In the sunlight, the two looked nearly the same. Why? Kaminari's voice was steady, but Hitoshi detected hints of uncertainty. Because Hitoshi clenched his fists. He had hurt his soulmate. He made him worry, and Hitoshi felt the butterflies in his stomach die. Every bruise he got, he shared. It wasn't fair to Kaminari. All Hitoshi felt was guilt and shame and frustration towards himself. Gentle hands gripped his own, and Hitoshi lost any fight he mustered. Because Hitoshi was well aware of how broken his voice sounded and how it shook along with his hands. He moved one hand up to Kaminari's hairline, tracing over the thin, white scar. Because I hurt you. His throat was thick and every breath felt heavy. Hitoshi wouldn't blame his soulmate if he left, blaming Hitoshi for everything. He wouldn't blame Kaminari for hating him. Shinsou? Kaminari took Hitoshi's long fingers, cupping them with his own, and guided them to Kaminari's lightly freckled cheek. He pushed his warm face into Hitoshi's cold hand. None of what happened to you was your fault. Hitoshi took a shaky breath, blinking hard. Oh. Looking into Kaminari's gold-yellow eyes, Hitoshi cursed his own teary ones. When he searched Kaminari's face, he was open and honest and determined. He was being truthful, and Hitoshi had no other choice than to believe this beautiful, bright boy in front of him. When Kaminari pulled Hitoshi into a hug, he let him. Kaminari's arms wrapped around him protectively, but their presence on his back was gentle. Hitoshi buried his face into Kaminari's shoulder, neck craning down. There was a comforting hand on his back, and another running through his unruly indigo hair. Hitoshi let himself melt into Kaminari, slowly wrapping his own arms around the warm, smaller boy. The hand in his hair felt nicer than anything Hitoshi had felt before. This hug was nicer than anything Hitoshi felt before. It was warm and kind, and it smelled fruity. The same scent Hitoshi had experienced at the entrance exam. He wanted to stay in it forever. You smell nice. Hitsushi told him. Kaminari giggled and Hitoshi felt it shake through his body as well. Neither boy pulled back from the hug though. Thanks. It's apricot, I think. Suddenly, Kaminari gasped and pulled back from the hug, hands resting on Hitoshi's shoulders. He had a big, goofy, shit-eating grin on his lips. Hitoshi narrowed his eyes in suspicion. Oh my god. I can finally do this in person now. Hitoshi groaned, bringing up a hand to drag down his face slowly. He knew what was coming. Oh. Are you a parking ticket, Shinsou? Kaminari carried on as if Hitoshi's suffering was worth nothing other than entertainment, his grin widening ever so slightly. 'Cause you've got fine written all over you? Hitoshi let out a loud groan, ducking his head, but his ears were burning. He had to hide his mouth behind a hand to make sure Kaminari wouldn't call him out for the small upward quirk of his lips. Kaminari laughed gleefully, but the moment was cut short by the warning bell, signifying the beginning of the students' allotted 5 minutes to get to class. Hitoshi felt disappointment bubble up in his stomach, but was reassured when he found the look replicated on Kaminari's expression. He didn't really want to leave, but he knew Aizawa would beat Kaminari's ass for being late. Hitoshi stood up, holding out a hand for a pouting Kaminari to take. As he hoisted the shorter boy up, he spoke. So, write me tonight? Are you kidding? I'm gonna write to you as soon as I get to class. Hitoshi laughed through his nose as he reached down to shuffle on his bag and pick up his lunch tray. He glanced at Kaminari, who had slung his bag over a shoulder, and walked over to him. "By the way," he said, looking down at Kaminari. He reveled in the way those golden eyes looked at him with such softness. Scratching the back of his neck nervously, he continued, "You should probably call me Hitoshi now." Kaminari beamed excitedly, practically bouncing on his toes. "Okay, Hitoshi." A shiver ran down his spine at the familiar word in an unfamiliar mouth. "You can call me Denki then." He followed it with a wink, and Hitoshi didn't hold back a groan or his light blush or the quiet muttering of, "You're insufferable." Quickly, the halls started filling with more noise as students made their way to their respective classes. Neither boy made to move for just a moment, before Denki took a step back, walking in the direction of his class. "I'll come get you at lunch tomorrow. You should eat with my friends and they'll love you." His voice was louder in order to be heard over the bustle of students. Denki shot finger guns at Hitoshi before turning and walking into the ever-growing sea of teenagers. Hitoshi rolled his eyes, turning the opposite direction. He tucked his chin into his chest, a pleasant warm feeling and small smile adorned, as he walked away from the stairwell. He felt like he was floating in the best way possible. He could feel the ghost of Denki's hand in his hair, the way his breath gently tousled indigo locks and tickled the back of his neck. He let a warm shiver run down his back and tried to focus on getting to class on time. Kaminari knew something was up when he walked into class 30 seconds to the bell and people stared at him. There was also the fact that Minetta's desk was without chair, covered in ants, smoking, and had multiple substances sticking to it. Sure, the stares could be welcome occasionally. Like when Denki made a really bad pun upon entering, or when he had brought everyone some of his sister's macaroons. These stares, however, weren't the enthusiastic, elevated, or absolutely tired of Denki shit ones he would have liked. They were almost pitiful, and when he looked around the room, people were either shooting mortal glares Minetta's way, or shooting Denki compassionate ones. It was fucking weird. Denki didn't reply to any of the messages at lunch. What can he say? He got distracted by meeting his fucking soulmate. Which, granted, ignoring them may have been a bad idea, because of the way people were looking at him. There was pity in some faces and righteous indignation in others, mostly Hagakure, but Denki felt too giddy to think about the shitty stuff Minetta said earlier. He wouldn't lie. It hurt. But still, his soulmate was the hot guy from the entrance exam. He couldn't be mad after learning that. When he sat down, his close friends were on him like vultures. Kirishima looked downright contrite, apologizing for not saying anything at the time. Shiro and Mina wore matching looks of anger, threatening to rough up the great boy for him, and Bakugo lurked behind them all, trying to seem uninterested. Guys, hold on." Denki tried to get them to shut up for just a second. He appreciated his friends, and they would have time to talk about the Minetta situation later, but right now he needed to tell them the news. Guess what? It was him. "What are you talking about, Kaminari?" Kirishima asked. His other two goons looked genuinely confused as well, but Bakugo had a raised eyebrow behind them. Of course he got it, he had all the brain cells. "The guy. My soulmate. It's Hitoshi." He beamed at them. A moment passed while the three empty heads buffered like Denki's old computer. Mina was the first to say anything. She beamed right back at him, punching his shoulder semi-forcefully, which Denki rubbed in irritation. She was a lot stronger than she let on. "That's great, Kami. Congrats." "Seriously? Entrance exam thirst guy?" Shiro earned the glare and playful shove Denki sent him. "Shut up, dude." Denki whined, embarrassed by the nickname. "That's really cool, man. Congratulations." Kirishima had been the last to break through whatever wall of thought he had been pinned under. He was smiling genuinely at Kaminari, shark teeth bared for the world to see. Denki smiled back, glad to see his buddy doing all right. "Thanks, guys. But I couldn't have done it without Bakubro's help though. Ain't that right, buddy?" Denki sent a glance to Bakugo from around the other three's torsos. "Pith whatever, loser." He rolled his eyes, arms crossed, but didn't deny it. Denki beamed at him. He opened his mouth to ask Kirishima what happened after he left, 'cause the state of his desk left some questions, But then Aizawa entered the room and everyone teleported to their seats. He could find out later. Focusing in class after finding out who your soulmate was after getting shit-talked by the class homophobe and having ADHD should have been an Olympic sport. Denki wouldn't have even placed, but the effort was still there and being stuck in his seat felt impossible right now. He couldn't even ask to go to the bathroom because lunch just finished and Aizawa would lecture him about proper time management and not wasting either of their time with stuff like this. God damn it, Kaminari. There was only one thing to do now. Hey, he wrote in glittering gold. He waited for a reply. All Denki could do was stay seated and tap his foot, or his pencil, or his fingers on the desk, or his other foot on the table leg. Denki really tried to focus on Aizawa's words. He was talking about the test they had for tomorrow, letting them know the main topics on it, writing them on the board, but Denki couldn't hear them. He did his best to copy down whatever Aizawa wrote, but as soon as his teacher stopped writing, Denki had nothing to ground him anymore. So he'd start doodling Aizawa or thinking about Hitoshi and his gorgeous purple eyes and long slender fingers that fit so nicely around his cheek. Dude, we're in class. Aizawa's gonna kill you. Bold of you to assume he hasn't already with this lecture. Listen, I'll write to you later, but my teacher's giving me weird looks. No worries. I still can't focus. There was something else I wanted to ask you about, so feel free to reply whenever, but I was thinking it'd be nice to take you out on a date. Like, a real date, not a give me half your lunch after on the stairs date, yeah? We could go on a picnic or maybe a restaurant or just explore the city. I don't know. Whatever you want, we'll do it, Hitoshi. Denki couldn't wait to show him off to his family. His mom would love him because he's polite and well-mannered. Tora would love him due to his aspirations of becoming a great, underground, psych-quirk hero. Peeps would love him because of their shared dark humor. Denki loved him for all the above reasons and more. He couldn't help but keep finding things he liked about Hitoshi. He hoped Hitoshi liked him too. Kaminari! Somebody yelled. He startled, accidentally shooting out small sparks. Denki had zoned out so hard he hadn't even heard most of the class leave. The bell had rung and now there was a small group of students left finishing up packing their things. Beside him, he saw Hagakure and Ajuru looking at him expectantly. He recognized the indignant tone from before, knowing now that Hagakure had called his name. Sorry, what? He asked her, closing his notebooks and sliding them off the edge of the desk into his backpack. It reminded him of those games in arcades where the little coins get pushed off the side of a metal cliff by a giant sweeper thing. What a painful existence, Denki thought, to live your whole life waiting to fall into an unknown yet inevitable metal pit. I said, I was planning on talking to Aizawa about what happened at lunch. With my netta. She spoke quietly, making sure not to be overheard by anyone. But I won't mention anything if you don't want me to. Next to her, Ajuru had a sad, almost guilty look on his face. Denki hated it. He hated this. Why did his day have to go from ruined, to saved, to ruined again? It was exhausting. Denki wished he could go back home, shove his soulmate news in his sister's faces, and then ponder the reality of an ever-expanding universe and what role memes might play in it. Denki took a moment to think about it. I don't really care. Ajuru's eyebrows scrunched together, and Hagakure's hands stilled. What? She said. I don't care. It's just his opinion, it's not like it matters to me. Denki didn't mean to be snappy, but he was exhausted and it was catching up to him. Guilty, he tried to quiet himself down again, as to not attain Aizawa's attention. That was the last thing he needed right now. A nice chat about his homophobic classmate with his scary homeroom teacher to be the cherry on top of this very overwhelming day. We know, Kaminari. Ajuru piped up. It's just, we're worried he'll do something again to someone else and it will. Kirishima's crestfallen face from before came to mind. Yeah, that wasn't okay. My netta needed to learn that. He knew a lot of his class was actually somewhat not straight. He knew both Ajuru and Hagakure were bisexual like Denki was. He knew of Jiru and Momo's soulmate status. Mina's blatant lesbianism. Whatever Uraraka and Ajui were. Denki wasn't much for other people's opinions of his sexuality, he learned not to care, but not everyone was like that. Mineta wasn't a hero to all citizens if he was a bigot. Denki nodded. Yeah, okay, he said. You should talk to him about it. Think it can wait until I'm out of the room though? For sure. Hagakure cheered at him. Thanks, Kaminari. We'll try not to mention you too much, but you know Aizawa. He'll probably want to talk to you anyway, so sorry in advance. Yeah, no worries guys. He sent them a toothy smile that only felt a little forced. As the two figures retreated with well wishes and a wave, they were replaced by his usual friend group. He stood to greet them, backpack slung over his shoulder. You ready? Mina asked. 'Cause we're going out to celebrate. She put her hands on his shoulders and shook him, her expression darkening. And I need details. Oh. He laughed at her antics. He felt Shiro remove Mina from Denki's person and replaced her grip with his long arm over Denki's shoulders. You said you've been wanting to try out that new boba place nearby, right? Shiro said. Lead the way. With Mina and Shiro at his side, Bakugo and Kirishima just astride behind him, Denki felt better. Lighter. He'd deal with their stupid test and the Mineta situation tomorrow. Today he could enjoy this. He could be happy about today, even if it a mesh of absolutely stunning and amazing and wonderful against horrible, gross, nasty, disgusting great boy. The boba place was close, but not close enough that Kirishima could worm his way out of a conversation with Denki. Just after beginning the walk, Denki had turned around to the redhead and asked, Hey, Kirishima, can I talk to you? He nodded but seemed somewhat wary. Reluctantly, Bakugo left his side to move up front with Shiro and Mina, and Denki lagged behind with Kirishima a little further away from the group. Out of hearing distance. Just in case. What's up, man? How Kirishima always remained wholesome, even when he was about to be interrogated. Both confused and warmed Denki. Are you good, dude? Denki didn't know how else to word it. Kirishima scrunched his eyebrows together in pseudo-confusion, failing to hide the consternation that laid beneath. What do you mean? Like earlier when Mineta was giving his whole shitty spiel, you looked, I don't know, hurt by it. And while I appreciate you looking out for ya boy, I could tell you felt it. Denki paused a moment, looking at the backs of his friends ahead of them. He turned back to his red-haired friend, eyebrow raised slightly. I don't want to assume anything either, but you and Baku, bro? Kirishima let out a breath he seemed to be holding for a long time. Longer than this conversation. Like it was something wedged in his chest and his throat that couldn't be expelled until somebody else forced it to. The way he faced it was almost resigned. After a lengthy moment, Kirishima nodded. Yeah. His lips weren't in their trademarked smile anymore, instead replaced with downturned lips. The scrunch in his brow was still there, but it wasn't from confusion. Yeah, There was a moment of silence where Kirishima was either trying to find words, or trying to find the courage to say them. Kaminari, I'm gay. He was watching the back of an explosive blonde's head. Denki wanted to shout, that's great, bro. But before he could, Kirishima continued. Bakugo and I are soulmates, but we haven't told anyone anything. We haven't talked about it really either. Mineta's words just reminded me of my grandparents. They're two pretty traditional people, but they're all I've got. I don't think they would understand, and what he said, reinforced whatever doubts I had about telling them. There's silence between them, and while Denki thinks of the right words to say, he rests a hand on Kirishima's shoulder. First of all, you have never kept 5 feet away from anyone, so I should have seen this coming since day one. That earned a snort from Kirishima. Denki counted it as a success. Second off, you're my bro, dude, and I would do anything for you. Even that means kicking Mineta's ass, or some old people asses. I'll do it, no questions asked, and if you ever need a couch to sleep on, I've got one. Just let me know. I'm here for you, bro. Denki looked from Kirishima's shining eyes to the back of Bakugo's head. You should tell Bakugo about it though. I think you're the only person he'd actually want to discuss this kind of stuff with, you know? I'm sure he's got his own, problems or fears or whatever to deal with, but he seems to really like you, Kiri. I'm happy for you guys. Kirishima looks at Denki like he just told him Crimson Riot wanted to adopt him. His eyes are teary, but the smile on his face is a wobbly gratefulness. Denki had the fleeting thought that this was Kirishima's first time coming out to anybody. He was honored to have his trust, but he was also guilty for trying to get him to spill his guts in the first place. Maybe he had been too forceful in his quest for bro talk and possible feelings jam. Denki hoped it would help in the long run. Thanks, bro. Kirishima wiped his teary eyes and slung an arm around Denki's shoulders. That means a lot. Anytime. Denki smiles at him, then quickens his step to catch up with the other volatile creatures they call friends. It's only after training with Aizawa that Hitoshi finds time to write out a response. They are sitting across from one another in a corner booth, awaiting the arrival of Hizashi in a warm restaurant. The lights are dim, but they cast the restaurant in a soothing honey glow. He hopes his mentor is preoccupied with the menu enough to not notice the light blush dusting his cheeks. Yeah, a date sounds nice. I have training with Aizawa on Saturdays, but only in the morning, so I'll be around then. I'm not really sure what we should do. Surprise me? Hitoshi accidentally missed the 5:30 train back to his foster's house, so now he has to wait for the 7:15 one. Oh well, guess he'll just have to spend more time with his mentor. Of course, Aizawa offered to bring Hitoshi along for dinner with them, and refused Hitoshi's excuse of not having his wallet. This wasn't even the first occurrence of Aizawa buying the kids some food after training. Lately, things with Aizawa have been crossing some kind of line. Sure, they trained, and Aizawa pushed him to be a better student as much as he could, but he had also started bringing Hitoshi out with him. They'd go get lunch together after training on Saturdays, and he would walk Hitoshi to the station every night. All of it was nice, and Hitoshi enjoyed spending time with him, but he was worried about making too strong of connects with him. One day, he'd leave and Hitoshi doesn't know if he could handle that. A few weeks ago, Aizawa started asking Hitoshi about his home life and his fosters. Hitoshi did his best to be as vague and non-incriminating as possible, but he also didn't want to lie to Aizawa. He was sure the older man remembered the first night they met. Hitoshi surely did. Things were good now. Hitoshi found that he was keen on Aizawa's company and he was warming up to Hizashi as well. He may have been loud and blonde, but he watched how he and Aizawa acted around each other, and he understood what Aizawa had said before. He couldn't lie that the two kind of reminded him of himself and Denki. Hitoshi wondered if Aizawa was being so nice to him for a specific reason. He didn't really do anything deserving of such treatment. No adult had ever been so kind to Hitoshi, and there was a now very small part of him that thought it all may have been for some other reason. Maybe he wanted something from Hitoshi and just needed to earn his trust first. Except Hitoshi did trust him. And Aizawa had never let him down before, nor had he ever asked for anything in return. So maybe this was okay. Hitoshi sighed as he reached down into his pocket where his phone vibrated. Aizawa eyed him carefully. There was only one person it could be at this hour, and he had texted them earlier stating he wouldn't be taking the 5:30 train home, but he'd get there eventually. He opened up the message and visibly paled. Message to me 6:23 p.m. Somebody snitched. None of you fuckers are talking, so you better have a good fucking excuse as to why you aren't home right now. 'Cause this is awful convenient for you. Hitoshi swallowed thickly. He felt nauseous reading the words in front of him, and in the pit of his stomach he knew that as soon as he stepped through the doors of his foster's house, he would be met with angry iron fists that knew no limit. Message to foster asshole number 16:25 p.m. I missed the 5:30 train, I swear. I'll be back as soon as I can. Tense and swirling with nausea, Hitoshi couldn't move. He was staring at the phone in his shaking hands, waiting for a reply. Whatever words came next were directly indicative of how bad it would get tonight. He didn't want Denki waking up to bruises again, ever, if he could help it, but definitely not the morning after everything finally fell into place. The seconds started to feel like hours, and it was painstaking and brutal. Hitoshi's head was swarming and he couldn't stop his shaking hands. The honey atmosphere of the restaurant suddenly felt suffocating, reminding Hitoshi of rugged hands pressing down on his neck until he couldn't hear or see. Across from him, he faintly heard Aizawa greet somebody and then ask Hitoshi something, but he couldn't respond because suddenly his phone was ringing. Hitoshi's breath hitched and died in his chest as he answered, looking nowhere near Aizawa. He shakily put the phone to his ear, listening intently. Get back here now. The low, crackle-y voice over the receiver said. Or you're fucking dead, kid. I can't. The trains don't run until. Shut the fuck up. Hitoshi flinched at the screaming voice of his foster father. I told you before to get your ass over here and you disobeyed orders. You never listen. You're fucking dead. The drawn-out beep of the ended call's dial tone sounded like a very possible reality in which Hitoshi's non-existent pulse flatlined on an EKG machine. There was a black hole in the bottom of Hitoshi's stomach and everything dropped down into it, leaving nothing but terror and panic in his chest. Slowly, he set the phone down on the table, face down with shaking hands. Across from him, he saw Aizawa and Hizashi leaning towards him, expressions akin to concern as Hitoshi shook. Aizawa was saying Hitoshi's name, asking what's wrong, but all the boy could process was white noise filling his ears, getting louder and more overwhelming as time went on. His teacher grabbed his trembling hands from off the table, trying to gain his attention. Hitoshi couldn't do anything other than look Aizawa straight in the eyes and say, "He's going to fucking kill me." Hitoshi knew his breathing was ragged, and he really wasn't getting any air in his lungs, but that wasn't as big of a worry as going home was. He couldn't breathe and horrible, weighted hands were pressing down on his neck and he couldn't go home, he was going to die. Hitoshi. I won't let that happen. A gasp of air, like breaking the surface tension of water and breathing for the first time since drowning. What? Breathe, Hitoshi. You're not going home, we've got you. Hitoshi took another staggered breath. There was no pressure on his neck. His esophagus wasn't being crushed into the floorboards. He could still hear. He could still see. He could still breathe. Hitoshi drank in air like a parched traveler at an oasis in the middle of the desert. When he blinked, shapes started to look like people. Aizawa and Hizashi, the former holding something in his hands, speaking softly but firmly to Hitoshi, the latter watching from somewhere next to Aizawa, a hand placed on his shoulder. Faintly, Hitoshi noticed those were his hands being held in Aizawa's grip. Hitoshi, can you hear me? Aizawa asked. He couldn't really speak, but he could nod his head, slowly and carefully. Okay, good. You're okay, Hitoshi. I need you to breathe with me, okay? He nods again, this time a little less sure of himself. Steadily, Aizawa breathed with Hitoshi until his breath evened out, and he only shook with minor tremors. I'm sorry, Hitoshi said as soon as he found his vocal cords working again. He pulled his hands from Aizawa's slowly, carefully. He didn't want to make him angry. Don't be, Aizawa said. Behind him, Hizashi sent him a small, familiar smile and glanced around saying, I'm going to go get some water. Hitoshi, Aizawa called him by his first name, he just now noticed. That was new. It wasn't a bad new either, mostly, unbelievably, comforting. What did you mean? About what? Hitoshi asked. He barely registered himself ever saying anything out loud, but apparently he had. Shit. Who's going to kill you? Hitoshi couldn't meet his eyes. Instead he took a deep breath, picked up his phone and showed Aizawa the text from his foster dad. Hizashi came back, with the promised glass of ice water for Hitoshi, who thanked him and tried to sip some down his slowly non-constricting throat. The tall blonde slipped into the seat beside Aizawa, squinting his green eyes at the texts. Hitoshi watched as both their expressions hardened. I can't go back, Hitoshi said. He felt weak, both from the overwhelming panic and from knowing he couldn't fix this. He couldn't wait until he was out of the system. He was fucking everything up now, but he didn't have any other choice. He couldn't die the day he met Denki. He couldn't do that to his wonderfully bright boy. Nobody is going to make you. Aizawa's voice was level, steady. He paused a moment, putting the phone down and meeting Hitoshi's gaze. You're welcome to stay with us, Hitoshi. He blinked. He looked between the two teachers in front of him. Aizawa was serious, Hizashi was smiling at him, nodding in agreement. You mean, until they find another home for me? That would still be a long time. Maybe months depending on how fucked his file would be after this. If that's what you want. Aizawa hesitated, but you're welcome to stay indefinitely. Hitoshi blinked and suddenly his eyes were teary. They better not be fucking with him. This sounded way too good to be true, something Hitoshi only dreamed about, and he felt like Denki's earlier word, am I dreaming, would have fit this situation perfectly. We want you to stay with us, Hitoshi. Hisashi's voice was gentle, open, and honest. Hitoshi didn't know what to make of it. Hell, ever since Shoyuta told me about meeting you for the first time, we cleaned out the guest bedroom. Just in case. It'll be easy, swift. We're pros, so we have a little more jurisdiction when it comes to stuff like this. They wanted him. For the first time in his life, somebody wanted him. You're sure? Hitoshi said after a long, silent moment. The two men across from him nodded, giving him much-needed affirmation, and Hitoshi wiped his eyes, trying not so discreetly to hide the fact that this was literally making his dreams come true. Later that night, when Hitoshi found himself in the guest room, his room, of Aizawa and Hisashi's apartment, he wrote on his skin in a lavender marker under the light of a nearby lamp and leaned against a wall that he could decorate however he liked. I took your advice. I told someone. He waited for a reply, and when none came, he realized Denki must have fallen asleep already. I'm safe now. I don't think we're ever going to have to worry about my shitty fosters again, Denki. When Hitoshi drifted off that night, getting real sleep for the first time in years, he felt free. When he dreamed, it was of his newly attained reality. Denki knew the perfect place to take Hitoshi on a date. A nervous excitement pumped through his veins, the same kind that kept him up the night before a field trip when he was a kid, and he almost took the power out, again, when he brushed the light socket with his ankle as he paced around the house. He blamed the exuberance on his inability to act like a normal person for one fucking day, as Peeps ever so lovingly called it. It was 12 o'clock on a Saturday and the sun was weaving between puffy clouds, when Denki spotted Hitoshi standing outside Yue's back entrance. The tall boy stood under the trees on a sidewalk path that led up to the forest. Denki yelled out Hitoshi's name, waving his arms above his head in order to get his lavender boy's attention. They met halfway, albeit Denki ran and Hitoshi sauntered. Denki stood in front of Hitoshi, gazing up at his pretty eyes and pretty hair and goddamn nice cheekbones. He wanted to hug him, maybe kiss him, but he held himself back, instead letting his gaze take in the other boy, saying, "Hey." He meant it to come out suggestively, like "hey, winky face," but it sounded soft. Shit. How was his reputation supposed to return from this? A voice in his head that sounded particularly like Mina's told him he never had a reputation to begin with, and really, he couldn't argue with that. Hey, Hitoshi looked down at him. So, where are we headed? It's a surprise. Denki wiggled his eyebrows, turned the two of them around, and brushed the back of his hand against Hitoshi's. An invitation. Denki would be lying if he said he wasn't nervous. He just really didn't want to fuck this up and take things at a pace Hitoshi was uncomfortable with. So, he'd let Hitoshi lead, that way he couldn't overstep any lines or boundaries that his impulsivity tended to cross without a second thought. The taller boy glanced down, gently grasping the smaller, warmer hand in his. Denki beamed, swinging their hands lightly between them as they walked. I hope you like it. Who am I kidding? I know you will. That's an awful lot of confidence for someone who thought my soulmate was somebody else for a whole 2 minutes. It wasn't 2 minutes. Denki gaped at Hitoshi in exaggerated anguish. He gestured languidly with their combined hands. More like 2 seconds? Sure it was. Hitoshi said, a small, sneaky grin on his face. If there was anything Denki knew for certain, it was that Hitoshi lived to tease him. The amount of deviousness Denki had to put up with through their soul bond was adorably annoying. It was probably the reason Hitoshi got along so well with his friends. They had a common denominator of embarrassing Denki as much as possible. Fuckers. As the two walked in companionable conversation, they rounded a corner, and at the end of the street was a large sign that almost immediately caught Hitoshi's eye. Denki watched as he lit up, purple eyes sparkling and expression opening up. No way, he said, looking from the sign to Denki, who was grinning up at him smugly. Yep. He said, smug look still present, if not growing in the amount of pure smugness that adorned his features. How did you know I've always wanted to go to a cat cafe? Well, it's not like you've written to me about it a bajillion times before. Definitely not that. Pretty sure that's not a real number. The walk to the cafe was much more brisk than it was previously, and Denki smiled softly up at Hitoshi, memorizing his open, bright expression. He felt Hitoshi's hand tighten around his, securely pulling him towards their destination. His hand was steadily warming up in Denki's, and all the blonde could do was watch in awe as the tall boy was practically glowing in anticipation. As they got inside, Denki paid for two and they headed towards the back corner, where there were less prying eyes and ears. Other than the cats, of course. For some reason, Hitoshi seemed to draw cats to him. He was a magnet for felines. Denki laughed at this as Hitoshi had found a place on the carpet to sit amongst the ever-growing pile of cats and pulled Denki down to sit by his side. Immediately, they were swarmed. Hitoshi seemed to be the epicenter to the cataclysmic storm of small, fluffy animals, and Denki was close enough to be caught up in the catastrophe. "Dude," Denki started. "Why are you literally a magnetic pole for cats? Do you have a second quirk I should know about?" "They just love me," Hitoshi said with a shrug. He was smiling though, so Denki took it as a win. "Don't move," Denki said seriously, looking at something just above Hitoshi's head. His purple eyes grew wide, bordering on wary, and he opened his mouth to speak before abruptly closing it as something small, fluffy, and mewling jumped on his head. Denki swooned, cooing at the sight of a snow-white kitten ruffling through Hitoshi's unruly indigo hair. It was small enough that it could fit in Hitoshi's palm, but probably not Denki's. As fast as humanly possible, Denki pulled his phone out of his pocket and snapped a photo of Hitoshi carefully looking up at the kitten, and the kitten carting through his hair to meet his eyes. Slowly, Hitoshi turned his head towards Denki. "There's a kitten on my head." He looked delighted. "There sure is." Denki beamed at him. He turned his phone, showing Hitoshi the picture. He was half worried the boy in question would be angry for taking it without consent, but it looked too cute to pass up. "I'm gonna need you to send that to me." "Oh, absolutely. Should I send it to Aizawa too?" That earned him a half-hearted glare, but it was deemed ineffective as there was a cat now kneading his head and curling up in indigo locks. Hitoshi's amethyst eyes went ever wider and he kinda looked like he was going to cry. "Denki, this is the best day of my life." Laughter erupted from Denki, startling a few of the cats milling around them. It probably wasn't even a joke, but Denki was filled with too much unadulterated joy to care. As his laughter started to putter out, Denki rubbed his eyes and spoke, serious and soft. "Good. I'm glad." They sat there for a while, talking and petting cats and occasionally lapsing into comfortable silence. "Have I ever told you how my quirk manifested?" Denki asked, his arms full of a heavy long-haired cat. Hitoshi shook his head from beside him, his side resting lightly against Denki's, and his hair now, unfortunately, free of kittens. He quirked an indigo eyebrow, showing he was listening. "My sisters and I were roughhousing. I was probably 4, so Peeps was, like, 6 and Toro was 8, and they threw me into the wall, but I ended up hitting the power socket thing, and I kinda exploded into electricity and freaked them the hell out." Hitoshi snorted. "So, my mom comes in wearing industrial-grade rubber gloves, and removes me from the outlet, but I'm literally just vibin'. She didn't let me take a bath for a whole year before I got better control over my quirk, 'cause she thought I might electrocute myself." Hitoshi laughed. He really laughed for the first time Denki had ever seen, not through his nose or in the form of a quirked lip, a full-on laughing fit. Denki felt his heart stutter and his brain try to memorize the fleeting scene. Hitoshi's laugh was beautiful. It was light and wheezy, and sometimes he snorted, but it was the kind that spread from his grin to his whole body and he bent over himself in order to catch his breath, and Denki wanted nothing more than to keep Hitoshi laughing forever, because it was beautiful like a sunrise after a dark, heavy night, and Denki needed to remind himself to breathe because this boy was breathtaking. Denki couldn't help but grin with him, his laughter proving to be contagious, even if it was making fun of Denki. Eventually though, Hitoshi's laugh petered out and he rested his head tiredly on the wall behind them, leaning his side into Denki's once again. Hitoshi's grin turned from sweet to something more bitter. "When I first got my quirk, I got put back in the system. I didn't have great control over it yet, so I accidentally kept making my questions orders, and freaked everybody out. Myself included." There was a quiet moment where Denki wasn't sure what to say or if there was anything to say. Instead, he repositioned himself so his head rested on Hitoshi's shoulder, and he could wrap his arm around Hitoshi's, intertwining long, cold fingers with his shorter, square ones. "I'm glad you're safe now." He rubbed his thumb absent-mindedly over the back of Hitoshi's slender hand. Denki had made his feelings about this specific topic known many times before over their shared skin, but right now didn't seem like the time for an angry rant. It was time for comfort. And that you're with people who care about you. The hand, holding Denki's, squeezed lightly, and Hitoshi's head dropped gently to cover the blondes. He breathed into the golden strands, ruffling them and sending a prickling warmth through Denki's scalp. "Me too," Hitoshi muttered. The rest of the day went fairly easy. Denki hadn't planned for them to spend the entire day together, but that's what they ended up doing. Losing track of time and being with Hitoshi felt like an innate truth of the world, something that always had been and something that always would be despite not necessarily seeing it clearly before. It was the best day Denki ever had, and he once won a pie-eating contest at the county fair to win a gigantic Magikarp plushie. From the cafe, they spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the weird shops around town, where Denki bought a sequin sweatshirt which had lavender sparkles on one side, and a slightly distorted image of the Lin-Manuel Miranda lip bite on the other, and Hitoshi bought knockoff Pikachu socks that made the Pokémon some kind of rabid animal that Hitoshi deemed to remind him of Denki. Later, they bought dinner in the form of a McDonald's 40-piece bag of chicken nuggets, ate like animals on the bench at the park, and watched the dusk begin to set in. It was nearing 8 o'clock, but the sun had set and the stars were out. Denki walked Hitoshi home if only to spend a little more time with him, and Hitoshi didn't seem to mind. They stopped outside a medium-sized two-story duplex. The porch light was on, tungsten faintly illuminating the two where they stood at the bottom of the stairs leading up to the front door. Denki texted his sister the address, and looked to Hitoshi so they could begin their goodbyes, when he stopped, frozen in his place watching the tall boy. Hitoshi was breathtaking. His face was poised upward, watching the night sky, and Denki could see the stars reflected in his dark eyes. They looked almost black in the dark, but Denki knew exactly what color they were, the shade of amethyst rhinestones and plum and jacaranda. They were a deep purple, so fitting for his lavender boy. He squeezed Hitoshi's colder hand in his, stepping closer to the tall boy. Hitoshi's attention moved from the constellations to Denki's gaze. He could still see the universe reflected in those wide, pretty eyes. Shrouded in the moonlight, his hair looked to be glowing, floating in the soft wind. "You're beautiful," Denki breathed, his chest swirled with a familiar giddy feeling he got when he wrote to his soulmate late into the night and imagined the other boy in another place writing to him too. He watched as Hitoshi's breath caught in his chest and he stared down at Denki with soft eyes and a light smile. Hitoshi's hand dropped his, moving to his face instead, running his thumb across his cheek. "No," he said. It was supposed to be a joke, but Denki could only beam at him. He slowly wrapped his arms around Hitoshi's neck loosely, his fingers gently playing with the hairs on the nape of his neck. Hitoshi stepped ever closer to Denki, resting his forehead on Denki's. He could feel Hitoshi's breath on his face. The hand holding him made Denki's heart stutter, and then another hand was placed on his lower back, pulling him ever so closer, and he shivered. It made him feel safe, like he was floating and Hitoshi's hands were the only thing keeping him grounded to the earth, to this moment that he never wanted to end. "Can I kiss you?" Denki whispered into the inch space between their mouths. He had been wanting to all day, but only now felt right. "I thought you'd never ask." Hitoshi smiled down at him, and pulled him even closer with that dangerous hand on the small of his back. Denki tilted his head slightly, his lips gently pressing into Hitoshi's halfway. He was surprised at how warm, soft, gentle Hitoshi's lips were. Denki's hands roamed from behind his neck, to holding Hitoshi's face in his hands and running them through lavender locks. He brought a hand down, running a thumb over his jaw line, his cheek, the shell of his ear, and Hitoshi shivered under his touch. Part of Denki didn't think this was ever possible. Deep down, it had looked at their shared bruises, shared scarring and thought they would die before ever meeting, but now, Denki was holding his soulmate in his palms, and kissing him under the moonlight. Hitoshi was here, kissing Denki breathless. Denki smiled into the kiss, and then Hitoshi smiled too when the kiss broke, but it felt phenomenal, like some kind of metaphorical epiphany because now they were two idiots laughing at each other, delirious with happiness and disbelief, and they floated together. "You're incredible," Hitoshi breathed, and Denki felt his stomach somersault in his chest and his cheeks grow warm, and he wondered if Hitoshi could feel his heartbeat from where his hands splayed out on the small of his back and cradled his head. No, Denki simply gazed and admired the boy in front of him, then moved forward again, slowly and delicately, letting Hitoshi close the gap between them. Gods, this boy was something else. He was gorgeous and kind and smart and attentive, and he was a hell of a good kisser. Denki felt the hand cradling his head move, lightly trailing down his side, and Denki's breath hitched and he shivered against the feather-light touch. Hitoshi pulled away after a moment, a Cheshire grin on his face. If Denki weren't so incapacitated right now, he may have had the fleeting thought of how devious that grin was. "Are you ticklish?" Hitoshi's voice had a dangerous, lilting, low tone to it. Denki's eyes widened. He tried to take a step back, but Hitoshi held him in place, trapping him with hands resting on his back and side, gently squeezing him as a threat. "No," Denki said, using his hands to push on Hitoshi's shoulders. "Hitoshi, don't you dare." It was all over for Denki. Hitoshi's dexterous fingers knew exactly how to brush Denki's sides lightly, in all the right places, to get him to burst out laughing, uncontrolled and squirming at the slightest touch. Hitoshi smiled down at him, gaze soft yet sly all at the same, watching as Denki writhed underneath him, trying to block Hitoshi's hands from moving towards the sensitive area below his ribs. Denki's protests fell on not deaf, but selectively listening ears, and eventually Hitoshi let up. Only when Denki was a gasping mess of laughter and glares and giggles, did Hitoshi pull his hands away from Denki's torso. He was panting, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. "I hate you." Denki's tone implied no such venom. "Sure you do." Hitoshi grinned wryly at him. "Denki thinks, if this is the way he's going to spend the rest of his life, he's pretty fucking okay with that. No, he's over the goddamn moon because it's Shinsou Hitoshi. It's his lavender boy. Denki would love to spend every second right here in this moment, laughing and happy and floating alongside his beautiful, glowing lavender boy. The moment is cut short by a door opening, shattering the all-encompassing feeling of being alone together. In the doorway stands his homeroom teacher, who would usually intimidate Denki with his deadpan stare, but he's wearing a light blue sweater and pajama pants with Hizashi's glasses on them, and his hair is tucked behind his ears, and it's the softest Denki has ever seen Aizawa look. Behind him, Hizashi is carefully peering around Aizawa's shoulders, trying and failing to seem inconspicuous. There's a friendly, warm honey glow to the house, much different than the gelid night. This is Hitoshi's home now, has been for the past week or so, and Denki couldn't be any happier for it. Sure, maybe having his homeroom and English teachers being his future in-laws will be weird, but Denki can already see how happy Hitoshi is here, and that's enough for Denki to bear the impending awkwardness. "Are you coming inside?" Aizawa's gruff voice asked into the silence. Denki straightens up, looks to Hitoshi, who just shrugs at him. He squints his eyes at his soulmate. Not helpful. I wouldn't want to intrude," Denki started, remembering to actually use the manners his mother tried to instill in him as a child. "My sister should be here in a few minutes to pick me up anyway." "Nonsense," Hizashi yelled from behind Aizawa, inconspicuousness abandoned. "You can wait in here, we don't bite. Please come in." His tone was so earnest that, upon Aizawa's lack of disagreement, Denki nudged Hitoshi with his shoulder, sent him a smile and said, "Okay." The adults vanished from the doorway, heading somewhere deeper into the house, and Hitoshi led Denki into the bright, warm atmosphere of his new home by lightly holding his wrist. Which fair. They were in front of Hitoshi's adoptive fathers and their teachers. But also, boo, because Denki liked holding Hitoshi's hand. As they stepped inside and toed off their shoes, Denki thanked his hosts, then looked down at Hitoshi's socks. "When did you find time to put those on?" He gestured exaggeratedly at the recently purchased feral Pikachu socks. Hitoshi slyly grinned at him, answering with only a shrug. But, seriously, when did he have time to put those on? Denki was about to continue his tirade, before he was cut off by the jingle of collar tags, followed by the appearance of a black cat with green eyes. Denki gasped, looking between Hitoshi and the cat. Dude, you actually live with one now? He beamed up at Hitoshi from where he had crouched down to stroke down the length of the cat's back. It wasn't a secret that, out of all the things Hitoshi complained about in his lavender words, not owning a cat ranked pretty high. 3 actually, Hitoshi said, watching Denki with a soft gaze. Meatloaf is just the most friendly. Denki fixed him with a stare, his hands ceased all movement, which Meatloaf didn't seem to appreciate, meowing in retribution. Meatloaf? Don't look at me, I've only been here a week. Hitoshi said, raising his palms to Denki as if that would make the situation any less wrong. Denki turned his head, searching for whoever the culprit of this crime against cats was. It seemed like a logical name at the time. Aizawa spoke from the kitchen to their right, where Hizashi and he were unloading the dishwasher. Denki blinked at him. Raising his eyebrows he said again, Meatloaf? Beside him Hizashi laughed. Wait till you hear the other cats' names. No. Denki stood, placing a hand over his heart, shaking his head. It couldn't get worse than fucking Meatloaf. No. There's a tabby named Sprinkle and a long hair named Jonathan Van Bornheisman. Hitoshi supplied, studying the way Denki's face moved through all 5 stages of grief. Somebody made a typo when they were writing Sprinkle's name on the adoption forms, and I made the mistake of letting Hizashi name our second cat. Aizawa sent a look towards his husband, who simply shrugged and gestured with his hands like, what can you do? Denki shook his head in disbelief. Somehow, it got worse than Meatloaf. I mean, I guess I kinda get it. My sisters and I once found a spider living in our windowsill and decided to name it, but it was nothing like Sprinkle. Aizawa sent him a glare that reminded Denki of his place as a guest in their home, and also theater student. I'm sorry, please don't fail me. Denki rushed out before he could do anything else. Aizawa blinked at him. Denki prayed to whatever higher power there was to be spared. You do that fine on your own. Denki was shot and Hitoshi just laughed through his nose, patting his back lightly and leading him towards the couch, out of harm's way. Don't worry, you're improving anyway. Hitoshi said to Denki's dejected form as they reached the couch. Denki slouched, dead inside after being roasted by his teacher. Thank God their classmates weren't here to witness it. There were more than a few people who would hold this over him forever. Hitoshi might, but he also knew every embarrassing thing about Denki, so this exchange didn't add much to the infinite supply already at the boy's fingertips. What did you end up naming the spider? Denki perked up, brought back to life by the indigo-haired boy in front of him. Well, I wanted to name her Pollo, but Peeps wanted Killmonger and Toro said they were both stupid. So, the spider was eventually called Esteban Julio Ricardo Montoya de la Rosa Ramirez Killmonger Pollo. Or if you want the literal translation, it would be equivalent to, Stephen July Richard Rose Montoya Ramirez Killmonger Chicken. Dude, what the hell, you wanted to name it C. Hicken? In Spanish? Like that makes it any better. Hitoshi shook his head as if he couldn't believe his soulmate wanted to name a random spider after chicken. Which, Denki thought, should have been pretty far established by now. Then, a ding alerted Denki his phone had a message. He pulled out the device and checked the lock screen to see who had texted him. It was Peeps, saying she was outside. Since when is that your background? Hitoshi asked him, leaning closer to inspect the image. He'd already seen it once before, and Denki thought the cuteness could never be outdone, so why bother trying to find anything else to set as his lock screen? It was the adorable kitten on Hitoshi's head one. Since as soon as I took the picture? Denki replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Gasping, a smirk grew on Denki's face and he felt a plan for revenge forming in his head. I really should show your dads this picture before I go, I think. Do. Not. Hitoshi threatened, eyes flickering from Denki's phone to his shit-eating grin. Denki sped like lightning through the house, tearing around the couch's side in order to not be caught by Hitoshi's long, grabby arms. Hey, senseis! He yelled, words leaving his mouth rapidly as he dodged Hitoshi's hands. My sister just got here, but before I go, whoa, close one. I think you should see this. Denki made it to the kitchen's threshold before Hitoshi could stop him. His denials of do not listen to him, he's a lying bastard, went unrecognized, and he held out his phone to two pairs of blinking eyes. Just as Hizashi let out an awe, Hitoshi caught up with Denki and began to do his very best to wrangle the phone out of his grip. It should have been easy, considering Hitoshi's longer limbs, but Denki was fast and good at dodging. He learned from all the times he had to book it away from Bakugu after roasting him. They struggled against each other for a few moments, Denki with a victorious grin and Hitoshi with a grim determination and flushed cheeks, before Hitoshi leaned down and whispered low in Denki's ear, "I will tickle you again." Denki immediately stopped, shoving his phone into his pocket, and bowed to his teachers, thanking them once again. Denki could deal with being tickled, but being tickled in front of his homeroom teacher was a big no from him. Hitoshi smirked at him as they slowly trekked towards the door. Denki put on his shoes and stood. He gazed at Hitoshi, realizing he was actually leaving now, and felt a little sad. He wasn't even out the door and he already missed Hitoshi. "Today was fun," Hitoshi said, seemingly picking up on Denki's souring mood. "Let's do it again sometime." Denki beamed. "Okay, but you have to pick the next place. And it can't be the cafe again." Denki watched Hitoshi deflate a little. "Okay, maybe for like 5 minutes?" Hitoshi perked up again and Denki smiled at him with soft eyes. Denki wanted to kiss him goodbye, wanted to reach up and tangle his fingers in indigo hair, feel warm, gentle lips on his, the hand on the small of his back. Instead, he hugged Hitoshi fiercely. His head tucked under the taller boy's chin, eyes shutting and lungs breathing in his subtle honey scent. He felt long arms wrap around him, hugging him just as tight. "I'll see you on Monday." Hitoshi's chiding voice was muffled by his hair. It was supposed to be a mocking reassurance, but Denki wanted to be with Hitoshi every day if he could help it. "Yeah." Denki sighed into his chest. "You can always write to me," Hitoshi said, and Denki leaned back, keeping his arms steady on Hitoshi, but able to see his face. He beamed, and he knew his eyes were soft and his heart was warm and beating fast. But Denki loved this lanky mess of a human with amethyst eyes and cold bones with every fiber of his being. "Yeah," he said. Calling and texting was nice, but there was nothing like waking up to little lavender messages coating his arms and the back of his hand. It felt less than. But this was real and tangible and so pleasantly lavender. "Okay, last hug, then I really gotta go," Denki said as he shoved his face into Hitoshi's chest. Hitoshi held him close, squeezed him gently, then released the golden boy wrapped in his arms. Denki waved goodbye over his shoulder, meeting Denki's gold eyes, and he headed out the door, seeing a familiar car parked on the street. He kept his head held high and started counting down the hours to Monday. He was about halfway to his sister waiting in the car, scrolling through something on her phone in a bored manner before he heard the front door behind open and slam closed. "Denki," Hitoshi's voice called, and when Denki turned around he saw 2 seconds worth of lanky lavender running his way, before Hitoshi was pulling him close, resting a hand on the small of his back, the other lightly wrapping around his bicep. Denki melted into the touch, bringing his own hands up to Hitoshi's face, holding his smile, his whole world, in his hands. Hitoshi kissed him goodbye under the moonlight, his lips soft and warm and gentle, and Denki was a goner. Being held like this, like he was something precious, something to be taken care of and treasured, was all he ever needed. And here he was, in the beginning at the rest of his life. This was the start of the rest of his life, and Denki couldn't wait to live it nestled in lavender, cold hands, and the sweet, subtle smell of honey.